Afternoon. I'd like to call the October 18th, 2011 City Council meeting to order. Will you please rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco. Here. Hotchkiss. Here. House. Rouse. Here. Self. Here. White. Here. Mayor Schneider.
Here. Any changes to the agenda?
No, there aren't, Madam Mayor.
Okay, public comment. I have quite a few speaker slips here. I have 2 minutes up at the podium. We're going to start with Justin, and I believe you have a couple of people who want to cede their time to you. Is Patrick McPherson here? Is Patrick here? No? Patrick, there you are. Okay. And Mr. Pennington, I see. So, Justin, you have 6 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council. I would like to give you a copy of the Los Angeles City Council resolution in regards to Occupy Los Angeles. And then I would like to read to you Occupy Santa Barbara's first statements. Occupy on the local level, our local statement, or the local statement, is Occupy Santa Barbara strives to utilize consensus via nonviolent, transparent, participatory, and horizontally organized process to enable outreach to build a collection of voices, including those of the disenfranchised and disconnected. Our commitment is to create an equitable, just community where all can enjoy a high quality of life. Our national statement is Occupy Santa Barbara is committed to ending corporate control of our government and to empowering all people through the establishment of a truly democratic process. This is a document that is still open to revision and change. I personally would like to see this City Council temporarily suspend Municipal Code Sections 15.16.070. This makes it illegal to camp in a city park at any time of day. And Santa Barbara Municipal Code Section 15.16.250, which imposes a general nighttime closure for city parks at 10 p.m. In the interest of honoring the First Amendment right of the people to peacefully assemble, I ask that these be suspended for De La Guerra Plaza. Thank you. I would like to see the remaining minutes that I have, if that's allowable, to Robert.
You have a speaker slip already? You already, yeah. So that's okay. We'll get you. Thank you. We'll have. There are a lot of people here with different opinions, and I think just out of respect, I really ask you to refrain from clapping. So thank you. Reverend Paul Vitt will be followed by Wayne Scholes.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, City Council. The reason I'm here today is to bring up the situation with immigration and with all that our country is going through. And the reason I'm doing that is just so that everyone understands that no state in the Union has the right at any time to pass any judgment of any sort on immigration. And so therefore, the most important thing is that it should be the employer that hires illegals to be fined heavily and to have the federal government get involved in that department. I can't blame anybody for not wanting to break into the United States. I was deported about 24 times before I was 18 years old. And fortunately, I stopped after that, and I was sponsored into the United States. And I came here, and that's 46 years ago. But the system is all over the country. Every state is trying to make a difference because it's costing so much money to educate and to house and to feed and to help these people. I don't blame them for wanting that. Everybody in the world wants the United States of America. But the system can only be changed. And it was Amendment 14 that changed it all right after the Civil War. After the Civil War, the 14th Amendment was put in after a year and a half that they worked on it. And it had to do with all the Negroes that were slaves and freed, and to make sure that they were part of our system as United States citizens. Well, they've never changed that. So today, doesn't matter who's born in the United States, is a United States citizen, which is fine as far as I'm concerned, because in my philosophy, I always say that you don't need a passport to get to heaven.
You have 5 seconds left.
But we must make changes, and it has to be through the federal government. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and God bless America.
Wayne Scholes will be followed by Kenneth Locke.
I first want to say the only incumbents that I support for re-election are Michael Self and Randy Rouse. I also want to say that within a week I'm going to be going up to Portland, Oregon to work at an Intel chip plant. And the only reason I can work at that plant is because I successfully proved that I was innocent against false charges and false prosecution by the Chihuahua in charge, otherwise known as Chief Cam Sanchez, because I have to pass background checks on about 75% of the jobs I work on. I'm a union plumber and pipe fitter. I've worked in aerospace, nuclear. I did med gas brazing at Cottage Hospital. And I want to encourage the people, not only of Santa Barbara, but around the world, to constantly stand up for your rights, constantly question government. If you don't fight for your rights, they'll be taken away. We don't have a crooked police department. We only have a few crooked cops. You never have a completely crooked political arena. You just have certain ones that could care less about the rights of the general public. And safety and the threat of arrest and prosecution by the district attorney's office, who is supposed to be representing the people, but instead what they do is they cover their butt. They will cover the police department's butt. They will cover the city's butt at all cost so that you don't expose the inadequacies of the system. It's make the public pay with every single thing they have so they run out of money, so that they don't have the money to fight in court. If it wasn't for people like myself and Peter Lance that have been fighting the police department and the district attorney's office, and all the people that are willing to stand up here and outside and around the world for corruption and deceit and crimes being committed by people in power,
You have 5 seconds.
they would get away with it every single time. And if our founding fathers had done that, we wouldn't be sitting in a country called the United States of America.
Kenneth Locke will be followed by Judith Everett.
My name is Kenneth Locke. I was a little away for the summer. Just back now. Back to what I do. I think of what I do best. Flying some signs off my bicycle. I have a sign. What I'm trying to promote here is heaven. Heaven on earth kind of situation. Utopia. The ideal community where everybody lives the ideal. We all become idealists. We strive for the best for yourself and then everybody around us, whatever type of thing. I think we've gotten off track here. But I always use the term idiots, so I hope you don't mind me with all due respect. I have a sign that says, idiots have nice days in hell. And it's just kind of funny because right now, historically, we've been in this kind of, I'm sorry to say, this hell place. And this hell place is actually losing steam. And I'm hopeful that people who have an interest in heaven, this ideal community, utopia, strive for it. I hope this inspires them. I hope the works that I'm doing inspire them. Let's see. No art in heaven, or idiots. In heaven, we don't need art in there. We actually will glorify, our teachers and stuff like that, people who deserve respect. No art there, no science. It's all one. It's, as I mentioned to you before, interdisciplinary education. Idiots go to art museums in hell. And we don't have art museums in heaven, folks. Thank you.
Judith Everett will be followed by James Glenwright.
Good afternoon, Mayor Schneider and council members. I have been enthralled about the so-called occupancy of the public square here because I think it has the seeds for future saving many, many aspects of the culture. And as it is worldwide, it is actually a movement of many different movements. We've been working for years for peace and freedom and justice, and now it seems like there's some opportunity to have this. So my first request of the council is that you facilitate as much as possible the operation here and come down and see what's going on at 6 o'clock every evening. There are very good relationships, and it is totally, of course, as been said already, non-violent. And my interest is peace and freedom because I belong to WILF, which is Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And anywhere around the world you go, there'll be an office for this organization. And on the 26th of this month, we're putting on a forum which is entitled Nuclear Economy, Who Pays? And it's very much connected with what I will want to feed into the occupancy process, that we've got to stop wars, we need to bring the troops home, we must get the funds to spend on people in this country. There are a lot of elders who are very much neglected, and my other actual...
You have 5 seconds left.
how many?
5, 3.
2 more items. Please,
well, no,
please
you
have
just-
your police trained in nonviolence. Have that done because it makes a lot of difference. And also to know of the National Association to Stop Elder Abuse.
Thank you.
Thank you.
James Glenwright, and is Darlene Nova here? Thank you. So, James, you have 4 minutes. Did you need? There was also a Scott Miller. Is Scott here? Did you want your own 2 minutes, or did you want to cede it to James?
He could take his own 2 minutes.
Okay.
Four is all I need.
That'll be followed by Max Golding.
Good afternoon, my fellow citizens. When I first moved to this area a little over a year ago, the city of Santa Barbara conveyed itself as a progressive community that was deeply invested in the preservation of equality and justice, not injustice. That would be whack. However, I quickly came to the conclusion that this image was in fact a facade, and this quaint little beach community was only concerned with preserving the rights of property and business owners, and treats its disenfranchised demographics with malice and contempt. This city has done little to address the many illegal bank housing foreclosures while simultaneously passing superfluous municipalities that are designed strictly to further ostracize the homeless. More pertinently, the same municipalities that Santa Barbara uses to alienate the homeless are the ones that are being used to molest the constitutional rights of the members of Occupy Santa Barbara, preventing us from exercising our right to assemble and our right to free speech, just to name a few. Though we members of this community are bound by your unjust local law this city has created, you, the members of this council, have the power to grant clemency upon Occupy Santa Barbara and those arrested in the enforcement of those draconian laws. Not only do you have the power to do so, but you are obligated to do so by Article 20, Section 3 of our state's Constitution, stating that all public officers have the duty to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. As I see it, the failure to repeal the city's municipality laws limiting Occupy Santa Barbara's rights overtly results in the city council's failures to execute its duties. To make my demands clear, I wish to see the re-indactment of city municipalities that further disenfranchise this community's homeless constituency, such as 1516-080, camping in a vehicle, 1516-250, staying in a park after dark. Secondly, I demand that all charges against all Occupy Santa Barbara members be immediately dropped by the city attorney. Thirdly, I demand an official endorsement for Occupy Santa Barbara from the city, and that we may be allowed to exercise our First Amendment right unabated in De La Guerra Plaza. Let it be known that if the City Council fails to comply with our demands, I personally will regard this council as a hindrance to the pursuit of freedom. And Occupy Santa Barbara will act vehemently and vindictively by occupying public City Council meetings indefinitely. My name is James Glenwright, and I'm the 99%er.
Max Golding will be followed by Robert Villegas.
Hello. I was going to turn my public comment into more of a public question. If any city administrator, Mayor Schneider, or any city council members would like to answer this question briefly in a word or a sentence of what are the most pressing needs of the community or the communities. So there's the question.
Well, it's public comment. We can't go back and forth on the issue. So if you'd like to state the rest of your comment, that would be.
Well, that's the comment. So I guess it's I mean, you're allowed. Is it illegal for you to answer the question, or is
Well,
it just?
we could spend all day doing that, couldn't we?
Well, I know, but I mean,
the
quickly,
point
like-
is for you
like
to get
in
your
a
message
word.
across to us in the 2 minutes you have allowed to you.
I understand. That's the comment. I want to understand what you guys think the most pressing needs are, so I can help you. And so
You're
the
welcome
community can
to
help you.
make appointments with any one of us, and we can have a conversation about it. But that's not the purview of public comment.
Okay, so everyone's refusing to answer the question. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Robert Villegas will be followed by Radin Soria Begley. I think I pronounced that wrong.
Good afternoon, Mayor Schneider and members of City Council. I have been actively involved in the Occupy Santa Barbara movement, and I think if you were to come down and to see what's going on, you could see how we're working to build a truly democratic process using consensus, no longer the majority rules, but really working and striving to benefit all members of the community. And one aspect of the community I would really like to address, and that's homelessness. As City Council is well aware, there's a growing problem of homelessness in Santa Barbara. That's due to foreclosures, fires, medical illness, numerous causes. And I found out recently that it was proposed to combat the problem of homelessness in Santa Barbara to spearhead a program known as a turnaround center. I would like to address this issue as an assault on the people who are less than fortunate than us. This is a retaliatory action, and I want to ask, where is my turnaround center? I'm college educated. I'm intelligent. I've held many jobs, but it is nearly impossible for me to find housing, food, clothing, and instead of shipping off people outside of the county, we need to focus on the community itself. Lastly, I would like to petition City Council and the District Attorney to drop all charges against the De La Guerra 8 and those who received citations this morning for exercising their First Amendment rights. I would like to request an official endorsement from Occupy Santa Barbara and City Council, or from City Council. And I would like to request that City Council grant Occupy SB clemency and allow us to occupy De La Guerra Plaza unabated. And one last thing, perhaps you can consider changing the name to Plaza de la Paz, the Plaza of Peace. Thank you.
Radin Soria Begley will be followed by Scott Miller. If you can pronounce your name for me, that would be helpful.
Hi, my name is Radin Soria Begley. I'd like to point out that is anyone ever really truly happy with their life? Because our world is filled with many different things and many different opinions, and if we don't understand that everyone has a different opinion and no one will completely and totally agree 100% of the time, and at least agree on that, then I don't know how we can sit here and just be ourselves and not worry about the fact that we might be making someone else not be themselves because of something that we do to them without knowledge of it or even paying attention to it or just anything. I agree with everyone else, and I think that we should let the arrestees out, and I think we should grant clemency to the SB occupation, but I also agree that we need to change things. We need to change things as quickly as possible, but, you know, we can't do that unless you guys agree, and you do you choose to agree, or do you choose to just listen and make a decision, or make no decision at all and just simply hear it and let it go out the other ear, as most of us did when we were in high school? I mean, what else is high school other than a gauntlet to break us into something that someone else wants us molded into, so that we can become what someone else wants us to be, not what we are wanted to be ourselves, what our parents want us to be, or maybe we're breaking ourselves into what our parents want us to be. But I think that you are not yourself, and we are not ourselves, and those that are not themselves are lost. Thank you.
Scott Miller will be followed by Mark McGinnis.
Good afternoon. I have been a student at UCSB for a year. This is my second fall quarter. And coming to Santa Barbara was one of the greatest things to ever happen in my life. I was living in the suburbs of Los Angeles where there was no progression, there was no energy, nothing was going on. I came here to learn that my food world is about only infinitely bigger than I'd ever realized it was. Local farmers, farmers markets, everything that people see going on in the daylight, in the present here, is mostly pretty good, mostly. And now you have something even better going on. You have the people of this community gathering in a park to better their community. How could you ask for anything more than that? And how could you overlook that? You should give strong consideration to working with them and listening to them. They have more information and more insight than most people I've ever met. I urge you to drop charges against people who just want to exercise their First Amendment rights. I urge you to support your community, which is gathering 50 feet outside of this building. Thank you.
Mark McGinnis will be followed by Brother Patrick.
Mayor and Council, I support the suspension of the anti-camping ordinance for De La Guerra Plaza. This is obviously not camping. It's expression of First Amendment opinion. Please get to it. Thank you. What's going on here, it seems to me, is a grassroots, bottom-up resistance to the attack that is being waged on government of, by, and for the people, by the legal aliens among us. Not illegal aliens, legal aliens, and those are the corporate interests. You can twist the Constitution, I suppose, and get a majority of 5 justices to say that corporations are people, but we'll all agree that they're not citizens. So they're legal aliens in our midst. They do not have the welfare of citizens in mind. The welfare of citizens, as we have conceived it in our constitutional democracy, is to use a means that is democratic and constitutional to achieve an end which, despite all of our disagreements, and we have them, and that's good, is basically the betterment, the well-being of the citizenry. That's not the goal of corporations. Corporations are not democratic, as you know. They're not democratic, not in any sense. And the goal is not the welfare and the betterment of citizens, but the utmost share of the consumer dollars. So we have very different worlds in collision, and they're colliding right there. Please recognize what's at stake. Please. Thank you.
Brother Patrick will be followed by Kate Longstory, and then Isis Castaneda, and the final speaker will be George Wright.
Good afternoon. I'm your mayor and city council. Even though I'm a newcomer to your community, my father was not just a councilman, but a vice mayor up in Santa Maria, moved up to the Bay Area, was an assemblyman back in the 60s. I'm personally in the spiritual world. I help veterans off the street. I'm from Hawaii, born, bred, and raised. You have a beautiful community. Your police department is the best police department I've seen. They are caring, they have programs, and they're working with everybody. And these kids, I call them kids because I'm quite old, and I have a 37-year-old and 4 grandkids. They are so dedicated. They read the Constitution. They're reading books and educating themselves about law and order. And we want to help all the homeless people. We want to help them get right and move on. And there's tickets for them to go to Venice Beach or to go up to San Francisco, or at least get them headed that way. But we're policing ourselves down there. We're not doing drugs. We're not dirtying the place up. The local community loves us. And I'm not here. There's no agitators as there used to be in the 60s and problems like that. But your police department is understaffed. There's only 118 officers, and you need outreach officers. I work down at CASA every day for a few hours, and you guys are great. It's just, this is a shining light because we don't want violence here. We want to make this and keep this Santa Barbara. So God bless y'all.
Kate Longstory.
Madam Mayor and members of the Santa Barbara City Council, oh, glorious revolution, blessed unrest. 99-1, those are pretty good odds, don't you think? There is no doubt that our country is in a nonviolent grassroots movement to restore the rule of law. Mark McGuinness was talking about a corporatocracy. There was a coup d'etat. They have stolen our democracy. And now we, the people, become conservatives. To conserve our rights, our Constitution, we are rising like bread. One part of a possible platform is that we would call for an Article 5 convention. If you remember, in our Constitution, Article 5, it says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, people, are created equal and have the right to pursue happiness, to be free, and have justice for all. But when the government turns away from those principles, it is inherent upon us as people to alter or abolish that government. That's what we're doing. And I found out last night from my colleagues that there has been called an Article 5 convention for July 4th, 2012, to last through October. I would also like to mention, in terms of Occupy Santa Barbara, it's quite an extraordinary movement. It's attracting more and more affinity groups.
You have 5 seconds left.
And I hope that Santa Barbara will be known for reversing the school-to-prison pipeline. Thank you.
Isis Castaneda and
Excuse
Susan
me.
Young.
This is a puchaka. It's used in our marches, and each one has a quote. This quote is, "Those who make democracy impossible make revolution inevitable." That is John F. Kennedy, and this is for you to get your mojo going when you join us, when you join us in our march.
You can hand that to Susan. Thank you. Isis, Susan, Selena, and Janice, come on up.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm Susan Young, and this afternoon I'm here with other members of the Leadership Committee on behalf of the Santa Barbara Teen Coalition. And we wanted to come to formally introduce ourselves, even though we know most of you probably know about the coalition, and also to thank each and every one of you for your support and for your diligence for youth and teen programs in the city. The Santa Barbara Teen Coalition consists of about 40 to 45 different agencies and programs in the community, so it really represents Santa Barbara as a whole of the different agencies that actually devote themselves to youth and teen program. So we want to just say hello, to say thank you, and just to tell you a little bit about what we do. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to the other members, and the Leadership Committee consists of members from AHA, Academy of Healing Arts, CADA, which is the Council on Alcohol and Drug Abuse, also City at Peace, someone from the museum, and someone from Isla Vista, as well as myself from the Neighborhood Outreach Services. And so at this time, I'll turn it over to Selena Rockwell.
Sorry, to Isis Castaneda, the program director with AHA, the Academy of Healing Arts for Teens. The beauty of our coalition is the diverse representation of the several agencies and programs that are currently here in Santa Barbara, Goleta, Ivy, and in Carpinteria. Our focus is our goal is to create a very strong networking coalition that supports stellar services to the youth in our community, understands and meet their needs. We are continuously growing in our membership list, and we are also inviting you tomorrow to our quarterly luncheon that the probation office will be hosting. We have been having quarterly lunches since 2007 with different agencies, talking about their programs so that we all create a stronger network. And so it's tomorrow at 11:30, probation office, just in case you would like to join us.
And just to talk about a few things with our collaborations, what we do, we did have the candidates forum last night. Thank you to those of you that were there. We also have Red Ribbon Week coming up next week. Thank you, Mayor Schneider, for reading the proclamation last week. And we'll have teens here next week to give you more details on that. We also have Spark, which is a community town hall meeting that's planned by teens, for teens. That's in the spring. We had over 300 teens come to that last year, so another great thing that we're doing as a collaboration, really getting our teens together and working on good, positive activities. And finally, we've put together our Professional Development Day. This last summer was our third Professional Development Day, where we invite teen organizations, those who work with teens all throughout Santa Barbara and actually within our county, and we have professional trainers to get us all united so that we're all really working together and really sharing our resources. So those are some of the great things that we're up to. Thank you.
And on behalf of the Teen Coalition, we brought water bottles for all of you because we do try to be very environmentally conscious. And it's from Santa Barbara Teen Coalition. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, final speaker will be George Wright.
Good morning, Mayor and Council of Santa Barbara, City of Santa Barbara. I support the peaceful occupiers of Santa Barbara's De La Guerra Plaza. I support the people who have been issued citations for illegal camping and the occupiers that were cited this morning. I know Alex Chabot, one of the arrestees of the De La Guerra Plaza. I don't know anybody who's more interested in justice and democracy than him. I request that all charges against the occupiers be dropped in the interest of justice. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes public comment. Thank you all for coming. We're going to move on to the consent calendar. I believe there's an item to read.
Item 2, downtown parking, proposed changes to fee resolution, recommending that council adopt by reading of title only. A resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending resolution number 11048 to establish parking fees in the city parking lot located at 217 Helena Avenue and eliminate the 90-day bus pass fee for eligible downtown employees.
Thank you. Without further objection, we'll waive further reading. Thank you. Anyone need to take anything off the consent calendar, or is there a motion to approve it?
Move to approve the calendar, or excuse me, the consent calendar.
Motion. Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that passes. Thank you. Move on to item number 7.
November 8, 2011 election update.
Okay, Mr. Lopez, Ms. Rodriguez.
Mayor and Council, good afternoon. I'm Marcelo Lopez. I'm the Assistant City Administrator. And with me is Cindy Rodriguez. She's the City Clerk Services Manager. We're here to update you on the election underway to fill 3 council positions. We've made lots of progress since our first election back in 2007. This election marks the 3rd time that we are conducting the municipal election, and it is the 2nd vote-by-mail election for us. With this being our 3rd election, our anxiety level has gone down. However, we are meticulously and very carefully planning every aspect of the election to make sure that we have a smooth election. Ballots are coming in, and as of this morning, we have received approximately 1,800 ballots. This is a lower number than what we experienced approximately at this point at the last election. About this point, last time we had 2,900 ballots. So we can see that we are having, at this point, a lower return of the ballots. I would like to turn it over to Cindy Rodriguez, who will take it on with the rest of the story.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. Prior to beginning my presentation, I would like to take a brief moment to introduce and acknowledge the City Clerk's Office staff who perform the daily duties to put on a successful election. And I'd first like to start off with Deputy City Clerk Susan Check, so if you could stand up. And I'd like to go and introduce Deputy City Clerk Brenda Alcazar. Records Technician Sarah Weller. Sorry about that, Sarah. And again, some of you have previously met Donna. Donna comes on as a consultant to assist us this year. She's with us for a little bit over a month to help us get over that hump there. Donna Grindy. And lastly, I'd like to introduce Mindy. And Mindy is an hourly office specialist that is here to help us to get us through the election process. And so I would like to just acknowledge the hard work that they do each day to go ahead and conduct this a successful election. In January of this year, staff did prepare a elections work plan to outline each of the daily duties that we need to perform. Sorry about that. And those tasks range from adopting resolutions to put on the election, to ordering election supplies, and to publishing legal notices. And to date, I would like to report that we are currently on track, and in some cases, we are ahead of schedule, so we're proud of that. On October 10th, city staff did work with our vendor, and we did deliver over 45,000 voter packets to all of our registered voters here in the city of Santa Barbara. And in that voter packet, each voter received a voter information pamphlet. They also received a ballot, one ballot card, and a return envelope containing prepaid postage. And I would like to go ahead and point out our voter information pamphlet is different than prior years. This year we took the liberty to assist one of our very talented city staff members, Allison Gruby, who is a graphic designer in community development. And she is responsible for designing this year's voter information pamphlet, both the English and Spanish version. She did an excellent job on the pamphlet this year. As I mentioned, each voter did receive a return envelope. This envelope here shows that we are paying the postage. It is prepaid postage. And on the back side of the envelope, each voter is required to sign the back of that envelope in order for us to verify that signature. And if they do not sign it, their vote will not count. As I mentioned, the ballots were delivered on October 10th, and so voters do have the opportunity beginning now, once they receive their ballot, to go ahead and turn in their ballot. They can turn it in at City Hall in the City Clerk's office between now and Election Day, November 8th. We must receive that ballot by 8 p.m. on Election Day in order to be counted. This year we have 5 drop-off centers, with the main drop-off center being City Hall, the City Clerk's Office, 735 Anacapa. We also have 4 additional alternate drop-off centers: Braille Institute on De La Vina, Santa Barbara Municipal Tennis Center on Park Place, Grace Lutheran Church on State Street, and Pilgrim Terrace Activity Center on Pilgrim Terrace Drive. One thing I'd like to add about the drop-off centers, each center is set up like a traditional polling location. We do have poll workers there and poll booths, and voters can also, if they've lost their ballot, they can go there and obtain a provisional ballot on the 2 days. Moving on to the drop-off center hours, the drop-off centers will be open on Saturday, November 5th from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and on Tuesday, November 8th, which is Election Day, from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And as I mentioned earlier, voters do have the opportunity from beginning now to Election Day to come to the city clerk's office to drop off their ballot or to ask questions. Uh-oh. What did I do? Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties here. It's not going. Go ahead. We're going to get some assistance here because I can't get this to go. Thank you. Replacement ballots. We are telling voters if they have damaged their ballot, lost their ballot, or have not received their ballot, they can contact the city clerk's office directly at City Hall. They can call us at 564-5309, and we will go ahead and reissue them a replacement ballot. Again, I would like to reiterate the submittal deadline. Ballots must be returned to a drop-off center no later than 8 p.m. on Election Day. And then if returning by mail, we must receive the actual ballot in the city clerk's office by 8 p.m. on Election Day. Postmarks do not count in this case. We have to physically have the ballot returned. A brief overview of this Election Day is the council chamber, again, like previous years, will serve as a central counting center. Drop-off centers will close at 8 p.m. We plan on having the first count at 8:30 p.m., and we plan on having the semi-official election results prior to midnight. And the entire process is fully transparent. Vote count will occur in the council chamber, which is open to the public, and the entire process will be televised on Channel 18 as we have in previous years. Some key stats for you. Currently we have 44,000 registered voters. In our first vote-by-mail election, which occurred in 2009, we had a voter return of 49.6%. This year's election is a little different than, as our administrative director mentioned earlier, we have 10 candidates, not quite as many measures or candidates as we had in our 2009 election. And the placement of the names on the ballot, we use the process that was conducted by the Secretary of State's office, which is an electronic random drawing. Again, we would just like to say any questions regarding the election process, voters should contact the city clerk's office at 564-5309, or they can visit the city's website at sbcityvote.org. And that concludes my presentation, and we're available to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, if I
Yes,
may.
Mr. Lopez.
You may see that I'm sporting a pin for the 2011 election, and Cindy has a pin for each of you.
Including the city administrator and the city attorney.
Ms. Self has a question.
Yes. What is the final day for registration for people who have moved and need to re-register for this election?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember South, the last day to register to vote is October 24th.
And where can they get the forms?
Voter registration forms can be obtained in the city clerk's office. Alternatively, they can go to the county elections. They have voter registration forms there. I believe DMV, the post office, and there are other county offices that also have voter registration cards available.
Can they drop them off at all those locations also?
Yes, they can drop them off. We are obtaining registration cards in the city clerk's office, and we are walking them down to the county office each day.
Okay. Can you give me the address of the county office, please?
The main office, county elections, is 4440A Calle Real.
Thank you.
Mr. Rouse?
Ms. Rodriguez,
what does the post office tell you is the last feasible drop-off day to get the mail-in ballots in under the wire?
Councilmember Rouse, we work really closely with the postmaster very early in the process. We did mail them a letter a couple months ago. We've been having communications with them, and I think what we're told and what we've come up with is the very last day we would recommend somebody to drop the ballot in an envelope would be on Friday, November 4th in the mail.
Thank you.
Mr. House?
I was filling out my ballot this morning, and I realized on the envelope you have to sign it. And it's interesting because I should have just known that, but I could have easily missed it. So would you just kind of like really emphasize that for us? I think that would be something that people who really want to vote, make sure their vote counts, could easily miss.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, that is an excellent point that that you brought up. In order for a ballot to count, the voter has to sign the back of that envelope, and the reason for that is that it's a vote by mail election, and in order to verify, we have to verify that signature. Once we verify, then that's how we go ahead and count the vote. Or count the ballot. And also with the traditional election, that is the same practices that occurs in any other election. If someone is a registered permanent vote by mail voter, they must sign their ballot as well, or their envelope as well.
On the absentee ballots, we've always done that, and that's the practice this time. And then I did notice that you put the information in the voter information pamphlet. If you flip it over, there's the same pamphlet is there in Spanish as well as English, and I wanted to thank you for that.
Any other questions? No. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item number 8.
Status briefing on Senate Bill 375 implementation.
Okay, Mr. Ledbetter.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, good afternoon. My name is John Ledbetter, Principal Planner with the Community Development Department. As most of you know, in 2008, the legislature passed the SB 375 bill, otherwise known as the Sustainable Communities and Climate Protection Act, which effectively mandates that a regional plan be drawn up for each of the regions in California. And essentially what this plan does is to meld two existing planning processes, the Regional Transportation Plan process and the Regional Housing Allocation Plan, otherwise known as the RHNA process for the housing element, into one process, syncs up that process, and creates a sustainable communities plan. That's what it's called. So the other aspect that was mandated by the state legislature is that the local association of governments take the lead in this process in close cooperation with all the local jurisdictions. So therefore, staff has asked the deputy director for our local association of government, Santa Barbara Association of Governments, Peter Emhoff, to come and give us a presentation, a little bit of background on SB 375, and brief you also on how this process is unfolding here locally. And Mr. Emhoff has been gracious enough to accept our offer. And with that, I will turn it over to him.
Thank you very much, John, and good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. This is a very complicated area. I'm going to try to give you a little bit of background. John has already given you a brief description of what this area looks like, but it is really an alphabet soup. So I'm going to try to break it apart, and I'll go over where we are right now in the process, what the steps in the process are, what the mandates are that drive it, what our schedule is, and then finally how this relates to the city of Santa Barbara and how citizens can be involved in it. So the backdrop to the process is really another law, AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006. That law mandates California-wide a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. The law tasked a state agency, the California Air Resources Board, with implementing that law, and that board in turn approved a scoping plan in December of 2008 that laid out a number of different programs, all targeted toward reaching that statewide target. SB 375 is one of the implementing programs in the scoping plan that accounts for a very small fraction of the overall greenhouse gas reduction target. So in California, greenhouse gas emissions represent a small fraction of the total worldwide contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, but within California, a fairly large share, approximately 40% of total emissions, come from transportation sources. And as a result, the focus of the scoping plan and the focus of SB 375 is targeted heavily toward emissions from vehicles. So SB 375 is one cornerstone of what CARB terms a three-legged stool to get at vehicle emissions. The first leg is aimed at reducing emissions from vehicles themselves, so changing the efficiency of vehicles and the way they use fuel. The second leg reduces the carbon content of fuels, so by lowering the carbon content, you therefore limit the amount of CO2 that's emitted from the tailpipe. And then third, SB 375 attempts to reduce the total number of vehicle miles traveled by ultimately changing land use patterns. So the Sustainable Community Strategy, which is the plan that's mandated by SB 375, as Mr. Ledbetter related, integrates both the transportation planning and the housing planning that already occur statewide. And it does so within the context of the regional transportation plan. So the Sustainable Community Strategy becomes part of the existing regional transportation plan. The idea is to achieve specific greenhouse gas reduction targets, which are mandated by the state, by reducing vehicle miles traveled from passenger vehicles, meaning autos and light trucks, and to achieve specific targets for 2020 and 2035. Those targets can be revised by CARB as needed every 4 years. The SCS within the RTP has to meet several requirements simultaneously. It has to meet the stipulated greenhouse gas reduction target, which for our region is a zero net growth per capita, both at 2020 and at 2035. It has to meet federal emission standards, including standards for ozone, for example. It has to be consistent with the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, which is the state-mandated housing that is allocated across the region. And finally, it has to be fiscally constrained, meaning that specific transportation projects that are envisioned as part of the SCS and the RTP have to be realistically achievable within the budgets that and the funding that is available within the time frame of the plan. So how does this planning process work? Essentially, there are two core steps, and the first one is the development of a range of alternative scenarios that address both land use and transportation. So each one of those scenarios has to meet the basic requirements that I laid out before. It also has to measure up to certain performance standards that will be identified as part of the process. Each one of the scenarios is then processed through a land use model and a travel demand model that show how that particular scenario performs against certain standards, including the amount of vehicle miles traveled, the number of trips, and the average speed of those trips within the system. Then those outputs are run through the emissions factors model that a computer program that CARB has developed to determine what the total emissions are. Out of the scenarios that meet the minimum requirements, the SBCAG board will ultimately select a preferred scenario, which is then incorporated into the SCS, and the completed SCS is sent to the California Air Resources Board for review and approval. The California Air Resources Board has the ability to determine whether or not the SCS is adequate to meet the targets. If it determines that it is adequate, then the process stops. Alternatively, if it rejects the SCS, then SBCAG has the option of preparing something called an alternative planning scenario, which would identify the impediments to achieving the reduction targets and describe how the targets could be achieved by alternative means. So the core components of the Sustainable Community Strategy then have to include a land use plan that shows all of the land uses, densities, and building intensities throughout the region. it has to incorporate areas sufficient to house the entire projected population out to the plan horizon, including all economic segments of the community and the 8-year projection of the regional housing needs assessment. It has to incorporate a transportation network which is adequate to serve the region's transportation needs, and it also has to incorporate what's called a regional green print, which is essentially a constraints analysis that indicates certain resources where future development is not desirable. So that would include parks and open space, habitat and conservation areas, flood zones, farmlands, and similar features. So the core planning problem, this slide shows where greenhouse gas emissions are today and where we project them to be on a business as usual basis out to the planning horizon of 2035. So in 2035, if no measures are taken, per capita emissions would increase over that period and would exceed the black line at the base of the slide, which shows the state target. The state target, you'll recall, is no net increase in emissions. In 2010, SBCAG prepared a target-setting document which estimated what reductions would be achieved by certain basic measures, and those basic measures would still fall somewhat short of the state target. So the challenge for us in crafting this plan is to come up with a pattern of land use and a transportation network that achieves the target. This next slide outlines a couple of theoretical measures that could be employed in the plan, which are very basic in the way they relate cause and effect to emissions. At the top of the list is rebalancing the land use mix, so essentially reducing the average commute by moving either more housing closer to jobs or more jobs closer to existing housing. Second, a possible measure would include changing the mode share, so increasing the amount of transit either through increased service or access to existing transit, or increasing other alternative modes such as carpooling or biking or walking. One example of a project that would achieve this is the pending high occupancy vehicle lane project on Highway 101 that will achieve a number of reductions on its own. Another set of measures would be traffic management and intelligent transportation systems, which could achieve greater efficiencies of transportation movement on existing roadways. And then transportation demand management measures that include employer incentives for employees to use alternative modes. Finally, pricing measures such as subsidized transit costs or increased parking prices could theoretically also affect behavior and result in lower trips. So this process is going to involve working closely with a number of different agencies, beginning with state and federal agencies, the California Air Resources Board, Caltrans, the Housing and Community Development Department in Sacramento, which is responsible for the RHNA process, the Federal Highway Administration in Washington, which regulates emissions from vehicles, and then neighboring MPOs, neighboring regional governments, SLOCOG to our north, the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments, and the Southern California Association of Governments to the south. Locally, we'll also be interacting with, of course, all of the member agencies of SBCAG, the cities and the county, as well as the Chumash tribe, the University of California at Santa Barbara, and the Vandenberg Air Force Base. What does this mean for cities like the city of Santa Barbara? It means principally collaborating with SBCAG on the development of the Sustainable Community Strategy, which is already underway, including some of the fundamental components that go into that strategy, specifically a regional growth forecast that projects growth out to the target years in the planning horizon, and also, of course, in the process of allocating the regional housing needs assessment. So, and that process will ultimately tie into the local housing elements through the accommodation of the allocation that each jurisdiction receives. Also, member agencies can identify potential transit priority projects which would figure into the plan. And it's important to emphasize that at the end of the day, each member agency retains its local land use authority. Although this is a land use plan, it doesn't directly regulate land use. That's left to each of the member agencies, each of the cities in the county to implement as they see fit. The only requirement is that, of course, the RENA allocation be reflected in both the SCS and in the local housing elements. So a basic timeline of this process. This fall and winter, we're still developing our tools, including the updated land use and travel models. We're beginning our stakeholder outreach, which this is part of, and talking to a number of stakeholder groups and members of the public. In the spring, we will begin the analysis of the alternative scenarios that are developed out of the stakeholder outreach and public outreach process, and then host a series of public workshops probably in the summer to evaluate the results of that analysis and to begin the selection process of the preferred scenario. In the fall of 2012 and winter of 2013, we anticipate conducting our environmental review pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, and then drafting the actual document incorporating the preferred scenario that's selected through the public process. And then we anticipate adoption of the final package in the spring or early summer of 2013. So right now we are beginning a public participation process. The public participation plan was adopted by the SBCAG board in August. There are 3 basic phases to the plan. We're in the first phase now, which involves scoping this process, so identifying the range of alternatives that should be considered as part of this process and what those alternatives should include. In the second phase, we'll conduct the analysis of the scenarios that are developed and then hold the public workshops, as I mentioned, for the evaluation and selection of the preferred alternative. And then finally, in the third phase, there will be public hearings associated with the adoption of the RTP and SAS and the selection of that preferred transportation and land use scenario. I want to mention in the context of this that this evening at 6 p.m. at the County Planning Commission hearing room, there will be a public meeting open to the general public to discuss those alternative scenarios. And all members of the public are invited. This next slide shows a little bit more in a graphic format how that public participation is envisioned, starting very broad with outreach to numerous stakeholder groups through this process, funneling down to the public workshops in the second phase, and then culminating in the public hearings and the adoption in phase 3. So that really summarizes this area. Again, it's very complicated and very technical, but I hope I've given you a little bit of a sense of why it's important, how it relates to the city of Santa Barbara, and again, how you and citizens can be involved.
Thank you. I do have one public comment speaker. If perhaps we could do that. Kellen DeForest, come on up.
Good afternoon. Horse manure. I do not mean this term to be disrespectful of the staff and everybody who's been trying to address the provisions of Senate Bill 375, which dates back to 2008 and earlier. I think it's an ill thought out reaction to the global warning fearmongers myself, but that's just my opinion. I use the term horse manure to remind everyone of the environmental crises caused by the impact of the accumulation of horse droppings in the major cities of this country and throughout the world, for that matter. New York City had a horse population of over 100,000, and that's in 1900. How to solve this horse manure crisis was a major issue, but technology stepped in with the invention of the automobile, and horse manure, at least on city streets, is no longer a problem. Technology has again stepped in with electric cars, solar panels, fluorescent light bulbs, and etc. By 2030, hopefully, the gasoline-powered automobile will be gone like the horse and buggy. Please let technology help or alleviate global warming rather than passing all sorts of regulations regulating human behavior, which doesn't often work. Is there any support to the idea or the notion that I see expressed that greater density reduces emissions? Also, excuse me, where did I put it? I would like to be sure that the scenario that is constructed takes into account that the visitor and resort-oriented communities of the Central Coast. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the public comment piece. Mr. House.
Thank you, Mr. Imhoff, for coming and making the presentation. One of the things that I was curious about is after this is done and the SCS plan, which I guess sort of new territory a little bit for SBCAG, which has really seen itself for a long time as oriented towards transportation itself, and it is the metropolitan planning organization for the region or for the county, and this is a chance now for the housing piece and land use part to get mixed in with it for the formally. Will there be the, I don't know if requirement's the right word, but the use of the SCS for making findings, to, as we do with the regional transportation plan, for funding and for findings of consistency with the plan in order to forward projects and proposals into existence, or will it just simply be advisory and have a maybe a long shelf life in some bureaucrat's office? I mean, where's it going to fit in terms of implementation and action at the other end of this effort?
Mayor and Councilmember House, really good questions. This is definitely new for SBCAG. It's new for everybody, all regions across the state. So we're all kind of learning as we go. To answer your question, there will not be consistency findings per se with respect to this plan. The plan really has on-the-ground effects in two separate ways. The first is the regional transportation plan does specify the priority for funding of transportation projects throughout the region. That's always been the case, and that will still be the case going forward. The only difference is that the transportation projects will also be evaluated against this filter of the greenhouse gas emissions that result from the whole package. The second way in which there's a real connection is through, again, the regional housing needs assessment, which has to be reflected in the sustainable community strategy and ultimately is also reflected in the local housing elements. Those are the only two ways in which the plan will be anything other than simply a plan and a planning exercise.
And so it shows that primarily, I guess, one big way is, at least, is in the design of the plans of each of the jurisdictions and how they are consistent with and fulfill on these goals. The Air Pollution Control District, which is not the same exact group of folks, but they sit in the same chambers and they cross over a lot, same jurisdictions, has been dealing with mobile sources, but fixed sources as well. It seems like there's a lot of overlap here, given the emphasis on emissions. And it'd be interesting to understand how they're going to, the two complementary agencies are going to be working together. Is this entirely under SBCAG's aegis, or is it going to be something where APCD is participating in terms of perhaps new rules or findings? It kind of goes to this whole issue that many times just even the built environment itself, not the mobile sources, built environment itself has a great deal of impact on the on global emissions. And so how do those work together, those two agencies, with regards to this?
Councilmember House, another good question. There is an overlap with respect to the types of emissions that APCD regulates, which are specifically things like particulate emissions or ozone emissions for the region. And the RTP has to take into account the Clean Air Plan and the Clean Air Plan budget, as it were, out to the planning horizon. So we work closely with APCD staff, and we've met with them on a number of occasions already. They're also in the same building as SBCAG, so that makes it easier. But we're collaborating closely on that process. They do not directly regulate greenhouse gas emissions at this point. So that's something which is different. And we'll see, if and when federal legislation emerges that gives them a mandate, that's something that could also be a direct overlap.
Okay. Oh, then finally, I think it's been pretty widely understood that it's not all that environmentally responsible to export your housing needs to other communities, and that's why it's difficult for each individual jurisdiction with their own general plans, to be able to really look at things in a regional perspective. So to what degree do you see this being helpful for us addressing these things across our jurisdictions as opposed to just one jurisdiction at a time? I mean, it's certainly been difficult for us here at City Hall in Santa Barbara in dealing with our own general plan, and how in the world do we consider the impact on other communities when so many of our workers come, from there and have to live there? So how will this be helpful to us in dealing with that?
So we at SBCAG, the SBCAG staff, certainly appreciate the difficulties that the individual member agencies face, and we're working closely with the planning departments of all of the member agencies through TPAC and TTAC to talk through issues.
What TPAC and TTAC are? I know it's alphabet soup, but
the transportation, the Technical Planning Advisory Committee and the Technical Transportation Advisory Committee. There are two advisory committees that advise SBCAG and SBCAG staff on technical matters relating to planning and to transportation. So those two committees, composed of staff from the cities and the county, are working closely with SBCAG staff to come up with what we hope will be a truly regional plan. I think the SCS process really forces us to look at these issues in a little bit of a different way. Whatever other considerations come into the mix in determining the allocation of the regional housing needs assessment, we now have to meet this greenhouse gas reduction target. So this feeds into the development of the scenarios themselves that we'll consider. And whatever scenarios pass that filter of the greenhouse gas reduction test are then available for further discussion and selection ultimately. But that frames the debate and the question of how the RHNA is handled.
I get it. So maybe you get what you measure. When you measure something, it begins to have an impact when you consider those things and take them into account. Ventura County has to do the same thing as all the counties, right? Is there any crossover? Is there any talk or articulation between the two jurisdictions? Will there be, or is this really a line drawn around each and every county, and we don't talk to one another even in this plan?
Ventura County is part of the Southern California Association of Governments, which also has to produce an SCS, as does SLOCOG, the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments to the north. And there is communication both with SCAG and Ventura County and with San Luis Obispo County and SLOCOG to the north. We have to talk. The travel modeling requires an understanding of interregional trips, which is very significant in the case of our region, especially because of the number of vehicles that commute on a daily basis from Ventura to the south and from San Luis Obispo to the north. So we have to be able to quantify those. We share our traffic information, and they share their traffic information. We also have to, in the land use and travel models, model future growth to some extent in those regions. So we also share information on that basis, and all of our planning efforts are scrutinized by the state agency, the California Air Resources Board, to make sure that it's done in a rigorous way.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
And if you wanted to speak in public comment, you need to fill out a slip, but if you want to come up right now for your 2 minutes and then fill out a slip afterwards to give to the clerk, that would be great.
Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. I really appreciate that. To these gentlemen here, I think one of the larger issues
But you need to address us.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I think one of the largest issues that you need to work on is city design. And if you could humor me maybe by going back a few slides to where the different phases were. Those three circles, phase one, stakeholders, Phase 2, public workshops. And then phase 3, public hearing. Now imagine those 3 circles as concentric circles inside of each other. That is a design that is nearly flawless because what you have is a centralized location. Imagine phase 3 as a place where the central government is located. Imagine phase 2, phase 3 inside of that directly, where you can have mixed use buildings, small local businesses, agricultural land, housing, and then Phase 3, Phase 2 inside of Phase 1, you can open that up to larger farming areas and making direct lines of transportation from the north to the south, the east and the west, and in between. It would eliminate your transportation issues. Transportation is a huge issue, and it is responsible for so much CO2 outpouring. So really, if you want to fix the issues of carbon emissions, you need to look at how the city is designed. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could fill out a speaker slip and give that in for the record, that would be great. SCAG and SLOCOG, their emission targets are more rigorous, I think, than at Santa Barbara counties, and ours is a no net growth per capita. Do you remember what up in San Luis Obispo and then Southern California, what their targets are?
Madam Mayor, that's correct. They are more rigorous, and I believe they're, if I'm not mistaken, they're both an 8% reduction target in 2020, and I'm not sure what the 2035 target is, but it's around that.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Self.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Is the air tested so that as our vehicles become cleaner, that counts towards our emissions reduction?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Self, no, that's not the way this will be regulated, if you will, by the state. The state instead looks at the process in advance and looks at our modeling. So we demonstrate compliance through rigorous modeling of the traffic that will result from a given scenario. And ultimately, it's the model and the model results that the state will be looking at rather than measurements of air quality.
So it's academic rather than scientific.
Well, it's not directly measured. It's quantified through a modeling process, which is based on the best modeling assumptions and the best modeling tools available that are scrutinized by third parties, such as the California Air Resources Board.
And not scientifically. It's through an academic model, not through testing our air quality to see if we're meeting those goals.
Councilmember Self, again, yes, it's through the model. That's how that's measured.
And then the forecast growth modes, do they consider that in this last 10-year census that we had that the state and the city has been losing population?
Councilmember
Or are they
Self,
going to project we're going to pop out of that and grow again? How is that?
The regional growth
arrived
forecast does take into account current population and does take into account economic trends. We are engaged in a discussion with the Technical Planning Advisory Committee now on how that methodology will work. So that's something that we're still discussing, and it is fairly technical. But yes, that information is taken into account in projecting out to future years. One important point to note is that the state also does its own growth forecasts through the Department of Finance, and the State Housing and Community Development Department looks to both the Department of Finance forecasts and the regional forecasts. So it's important that our regional forecast be able to stand up to scrutiny by the state agencies.
Okay, my last question is, do they account for vegetation as mitigating air quality, which it does?
Mayor and Councilmember Self, no, this plan looks at just vehicle emissions.
So there's nothing we can do positive other than build dense and high and...
Well, there are a range of measures which I outlined in my presentation,
Yes.
which in theory can reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions, and they're not simply a matter of land use. There are a range of different measures, including transit options and transportation system options, which can also achieve those reductions to some degree.
Okay, so it's theoretical. Thank you.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I was actually wondering about the influence of technology, as Mr. DeForest brought up. Seems like we're probably closer to getting acronym pollution than we are anything else at this point in time. You mentioned the sources of transit, or the increase of public transit, as being one of the pieces of the model. When we talk about that, will it be trying to identify funding sources for that, since that's a very highly subsidized solution?
Mayor and Councilmember Rouse, yes. Through the RTP, transit options do have to be quantified. The funding for that has to be allocated through the RTP, and that is prioritized against other transit and transportation projects. So, yes, is the answer.
Okay, and then so if the plan goes into effect and we hit a home run, what would be right now? You say we have a 2% effect on the global greenhouse gas impacts. So what would be our effective reduction if this plan really does everything it should do?
I put up a slide that showed the state target relative to the business as usual projection, and the state target is a no net increase in per capita emissions. So emissions in absolute numbers can grow over time. They just can't grow faster than the rate of population. And the answer is that would remain constant.
And static. Okay. Thank you.
I just want to remind us that the HOV project, which is not alternate transportation, is going to cost $500 million. So that's quite a lot of chunk of change too. So, Mr. House.
Yeah, I just want to take a minute and follow up on some of the questions that you've heard so far. So in the modeling, which is pretty extensive, it's measuring tons of pollutants that are emitted by different kinds of sources, and that information is pretty critical information. I mean, when we put that much pollution into the air, there are impacts, and it's based deeply in science, and as I understand it. And the modeling is the degree to which it can reflect what really is happening on the ground, or, by transportation or by fixed sources or whatever the different sources, measured in all those different ranges of size of particles and their impacts on the environment. That's a very rigorous scientific process. Am I misunderstanding this? I mean, it's not just a wish and a prayer.
Mayor and Councilmember House, I can kind of work backwards through the modeling process. The final step of the modeling process looks at the emissions from vehicle miles traveled. So it looks at emissions from one source really only, which is passenger vehicles, autos and light trucks. And it does that based on the vehicle miles traveled that the second model, the travel model, spits out. There's a direct correlation between vehicle miles traveled and emissions, which is a very well-established relationship based on fuel use. We can say with a very high degree of certainty what the emissions are for a given vehicle for a given number of miles traveled. Where it becomes less certain and there are more variables is in the travel model itself, which looks at it calculates the number of miles traveled for a given land use and transportation pattern. So, given certain assumptions about where housing is and where jobs are, where certain attractors are in a network, a transportation network, and where certain generators are, the model calculates the total number of vehicle miles traveled within the system. That is it is rigorous, and it uses the best available tools, but it is not direct observation. It's not an empirical observation the way, a measurement of air quality is. So it is a little bit more subject to interpretation.
Right, sure. Well, until you have to build a new freeway. Right? And then it becomes very real in dollars and cents, and you can actually see the impact of the numbers of vehicles that are having to travel so far and that kind of thing.
What we'll do once the models are constructed is run through a range of different scenarios, which will include different transportation projects. I mean, things that we know will happen or that we can be pretty sure will happen, like the HOV project, will be built into the scenarios, and we'll see an immediate reduction from that. And beyond that, there'll be questions about what are the priorities for the region with respect to transportation and with respect to housing. And that's where we need the public's input and where we need decision makers' input as to what are the scenarios that we should be considering, because that's what's going to go into the model, and that's what we'll evaluate.
And it's a big feedback loop of some sort. I mean, you actually get real results in real time that get fed back into the modeling system. As I recall, the models are continually being trued up.
We will try to quantify each separate component. So taking the HOV lane, for example, we'll try to see exactly what the reduction is that's achieved through that component, and ditto for other components. There is, in some instances, there may be a synergistic effect, and we'll have to evaluate those scenarios separately.
Beautiful. Okay, so reducing emissions from vehicles, reducing carbon content of fuels, and reducing vehicle miles traveled. All three things are required to succeed in this effort.
Councilmember House, the SCS only looks at the third component, which is the vehicle miles traveled. There are other pieces of state regulation which address the efficiency of vehicles and the carbon content of fuels. So we're not concerned with those in this regional planning process. We're just looking at the sustainable community strategy.
But I mean, in the larger picture, we have to deal with it. Just like APCD, Air Pollution Control District, is measuring the quality of our air, and if we exceed the state or federal standards, we pay a pretty big penalty. It actually can harm our local industry's ability to grow, for instance. All right, well, just thank you very much. I wanted to see if there's some hard edges on what seemed for a moment there to be just, kind of hocus pocus. It doesn't sound like it is. It sounds like it's pretty rigorously defined. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just end by saying, I mean, whether the models are academic, scientific, whatever you want to call it, at the end of the day, moving forward and making decisions on how we get from point A to point B, where we build housing, how they interact, is going to affect our day-to-day life. It's going to get us, ideally out of traffic. It's going to make us a little more cohesive in terms of community and living and working in the same place. So, but in order to even get to that kind of ideal, I guess, you need to create some models and have stakeholder input, and that's really what you're trying to do. It's just being couched in terms about vehicle miles traveled and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, but I think if you look at it as how does this affect me, or how does this affect my family, it's going to be about their quality of life and what they do day in and day out, getting to work, getting to school, and getting around town or getting out of town when they need to, and how are they going to do it. So you need to figure out some planning way to make that happen, because every decision has consequences, whether it means you choose one set or another set or choose to do nothing. That's still a decision to make. So I like to sort of think of it in that bigger context, even though the law itself in SB 375 is looking at a specific issue about vehicle miles traveled and how housing and transportation interact, but it's for a bigger purpose, environmental quality as well as our day-to-day living. So, but that's my 2 cents.
Mayor, that's correct, and just to add to that and to the scientific reliability of the models that we use, there are safeguards along the way. So, for example, the travel model update that we're presently undertaking will be peer-reviewed by a panel of third-party peer reviewers that have no connection to this process, that include people from state agencies, a professor from UCSB, a range of other parties who will be involved in that and who will look at the model, make sure that it's state of the practice and does everything that models like that are supposed to do. And beyond that, that is the way you described it is indeed what comes out of that process.
Well, thank you. There's no, just to receive a status briefing, so no motions necessary. I appreciate you coming in today. So thank you. Unless there's any other comments, we'll move on. Thank you very much. To item number 9.
Appeal of single-family design board approval for 1359 and 1383 Santa Teresita Drive erosion repair.
Okay, this is an appeal, so as appeals work, we'll first hear a presentation from staff, and I don't know if there's anyone from the Single Family Design Review Board who will, yes, hello, that will be speaking right after the staff presentation. Then it will go to the appellant, and the appellant has up to 30 minutes to present its case, and then the applicant will also have up to 30 minutes. Any time you have left over could be used after the public comment period, if there is any, and then after the public comment period and the remaining time used by the appellant and applicant, it goes to the council for their deliberation. So that's the process, and we'll move on to Mr. Limon.
Madam Mayor, council members, Today's appeal involves a pretty straightforward issue involving a repair of a driveway and slope failure associated with that driveway. And I'm going to have some slides here that will walk you through the location, which is on a private easement located on the outskirts of the city. This is just aerial shows you the location of the driveway on the lower end here. I think it's detailed in yellow. It's about 100 yards, which is subject to the repair permit being proposed. And the upper portion shows that the driveway actually serves a property in the county. And I'll walk you through that a little bit more. I do have some slides that shows the progression of the aerial of this location where over the course of years you'll see the delineation on the lower and middle there where the roadway was improved incrementally over the years. And you can see the final effect, which is actually a roadway that's was placed on that hill and subject to some slope failure. With respect to the project description, it is a secondary access road serving this Rancho San Roque, which is located in the county at 1575 North Ontario Road. The property is owned by Pacific Core Incorporated and known as the Klein property. There's approximately 2,500 cubic yards of grading that's necessary to recompact and fill some of the lost soil that is eroded on the hillside. That's primary. The course would be to fill that area. The work is, again, located in a 50-foot wide easement between the property owners. The properties at 1359 and 1383 Santa Teresita Drive. Those property owners are the Alos and the Foleys. The Foleys are the appellants. They're on the lower end. What is proposed is a 12 to 14-foot wide roadway, and the sole repair work required to do the damage repairs does involve a civil and a geotechnical engineer reports and recommendations for the stabilization and the drainage plan for that repair work. This is the actual plan that was presented to the Single Family Design Board. It just demonstrates the slope in question as well as the drainage that's going to be collected at the low point in the center of this roadway and piped to a dissipation device on the lower right there. And that seems to be one of the contentions on the part of the appellants as to whether that concentration of flow is appropriate. Staff has a position that it's not uncommon to have that type of drainage down the hill on a hillside. This is the section that was provided to the Single Family Design Board that gives you an extent of the angle of the slope and what type of benching and keyways and recompaction is necessary to stabilize the slope. Here you have site photos that were presented to the boards for consideration so they can get an understanding of this driveway curb cut that's been placed at Santa Teresita, as well as the condition of the roadway and what caused the slippage. Here we have some erosion, evidence of erosion that's contributed to slope failure and part of the road being actually breaking away from the flat portions of the site. A quick summary of the appeal issues involve, again, the concerns about the continued erosion and stability of the soil and the slope, concerns regarding displacement of water runoff in the proposed drainage plan. There have been concerns cited that the city did not do sufficient environmental review and that there may be traffic impacts associated with the increased volume of the roadway use. Long history of dispute exists over the improvements in the Izmit area. We have a lot of records regarding the commencement of some construction work, how the building official responded at various times over the years. And again, the incremental approach to making improvements where some of the improvements wouldn't trigger a building permit, and therefore they occurred, and some concerns about how that evolved over the years. And again, what extent of paving has been done to the driveway and road and the extent of paving proposed now. And that seems to be some of the concerns of how the paving of the roadway would increase the intensity of use. Staff responses to the appeal issues are that we believe these proposed slope repairs are being professionally engineered with a specific civil engineered grading plan involving preliminary geotechnical reports, so we have the right professionals involved to repair the slope. We believe that the proposed drainage plan, again, directs and collects the flow at a low point on the road to an appropriate location down the hill, which is not uncommon for a hillside development. The potential environmental traffic impacts were deemed not significant. This is a private driveway. There's not a significant amount of volume, we believe, associated with this roadway use. And where there are some conditions on the project restricting grading during the rainy period of the year, which is November through April. Again, there is a long history of dispute in the easement area. We believe it's not relevant. We think it's primarily a civil matter with respect to the private use of private roads between private property owners. The paving of the driveway would provide for drainage and assistant protection, we believe. That's part of the problem now. I think the roadway was not improved to the degree where the road drainage was not satisfactorily being performed on the road. With respect to single-family design review, what is before you today is not necessarily a history of the site, is what the single-family design board considered when they granted an approval. And that is they did consider the comments that were received from the appellants as well as other neighbors and considered that input with respect to the driveway improvements and basically determined that it was consistent with design guidelines for hillside development. There is imported fill, but that is being placed to reestablish a slope condition. So I believe there was no conclusion that the hillside was being scarred to the degree of it would be a visual concern. They did request additional information on the paving materials proposed and the hydro CD mix, so we do still need a final approval if this council agrees to forward it back to the Single Family Design Board. And again, we believe the soil repair work has the right professionals involved to improve the situation, the current damage that's occurred. There is general compliance with hillside design guidelines and NPO findings. The Single Family Design Board made those findings as required for hillside development and eventually granted project design approval by a 4-0 vote. Staff's recommendation is you deny the appeal and supports the Single Family Design Board decision. Fred Sweeney, representing the Single Family Design Board, is here as well to answer any questions if you like.
Thank you. Mr. Sweeney, did you want to add anything at this point? No? You're just here for questions. Okay. Any questions from the council first to staff? Mr. Hotchkiss?
Is this a primary or secondary access to the Ontario address?
Councilmember Hotchkiss, Madam Mayor, this is a secondary access to the property. That's the way it's been represented. They do have a different access point that is achieved through going through a private driveway into the county portion of the other properties.
Is this viewed as a fire safety road or anything?
I believe that it contributes to this overall safety of the property. It's quite large, and therefore I believe it would be an alternate route. I didn't specifically ask the fire department on this case, but I'm sure the applicant will have some answers with respect to why they did the driveway.
Thank you.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Is this part of a development package? In other words, is there a residence being built or?
Councilmember White, we are under the understanding that there are other development applications with the county under their purview currently and in the past. They've had a series of improvements. Right now, I think there's a current request for a cabana and pool, but they've had previous development approvals.
Okay. And then the drainage system that is proposed, is that on easement property? Is it on a different neighbor's property? Is there permission?
Councilmember White, the proposal is to include a drainage improvement within the easement area. Eventually, I believe the drainage would flow onto the appellant's property, the Foley's property. But it would just be in a dissipation mode at that point. There is a dissipation device where the water is collected down on the hillside, and eventually it would flow downhill onto the Foley's property.
but all the improvements would be within, or proposed to be within the easement, and then it would simply be water that would be
That's
flowing.
correct. And one of the contentions between the property owners appears to be, should the grading recompaction involve grading on the Foley's property lower down the hill to actually do it in a more improved manner, because they're limited to do the work on their own property. There is no agreement to enter onto the Foley's property to do grading on their property, and that seems to be some area of contention.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. House?
I just want to get this clarified. So when we were on the site visit and we walked down from Santa Teresita, we lost elevation, and then it went to a low point, and then it regained elevation on the other side. And so it's apparent that the way that it's graded now, there's no way for flow to go out to Santa Teresita, as might be more advantageous in some new developments, say. But this road was graded into the hillside at some point with that kind of slope or that kind of elevation loss and gain. And I saw in one of the letters there was a wish, at least, that the drainage could be arranged so that it would just come out to the street. So is there any part of this proposal that would actually capture water, say, before it even got to the road and or the driveway, and carried some bulk of it, or somehow sheeting off the side of the hill back out to the street like we normally would do for new development? Is any of the proposal has that been considered, talked about?
Councilmember House, you may want to ask the applicants, but that I don't understand is currently the proposal. And we as staff asked the question, how feasible is it to raise the grades to entertain the idea that the Foley's had, which is to get the water out to Santa Teresita. And it was deemed quite unfeasible based on the quantity of fill that would be required to raise the road, and also the retaining wall systems that would be required to accomplish
They
that.
might want to address that. I was actually asking simply a simpler approach, which would be to capture as much as the sheet flow off of the side of the hill above the road before it got to the road, at an elevation that would allow it to come off the side of the hill
There
onto the
are currently some collection devices, but we did not do a survey of what exactly we do have. You might
I think
ask
we'll
the
want us to have
applicant
them address that. We saw on the downslope side, on the adjacent property, where they had put in those what are they called? The swales. Yeah, to capture the flow lower down and direct it and actually segment it so it didn't get any, momentum going down the hill. So it'd be very interesting to hear those kinds of solutions as well. Thank you.
Mr. Hotchkiss, you had another question?
I do, Madam Mayor, and it's sort of supplemental to what Mr. House was asking. Could you go back to a slide that showed an aerial of the, do we have one that's, let's see, show me where the, okay. All right, this doesn't quite show where the county, we don't quite have where the county is here, but that's just the city right there, right?
We have this one that shows the county.
Can you have a pointer that can show me where the county is?
Right. The shaded portion is the city-county boundary line.
Okay, then it goes up. Well, I walked up beyond the fence there.
Right. This is the gate.
That's the gate.
Location,
Okay.
right, and it starts
So I
going
walked
into
up
this
farther there, and just where you were showing where the vertical portion of that road is, I would think, I don't know, I'm guessing, but in a storm, that would be a regular river coming down there, because it's getting all that runoff from the side of the hill and then just focusing it down to really the side of the hill. Anyway, I guess that's county, but what I'm wondering is there any way to divert some of that water so that we lessen the impacts where it's a problem now for the two appellants?
Councilmember Hotchkiss, this plan has not been reviewed by Building and Safety at this point. So we still have that ability to have them look at the drainage plan and see if we can make improvements. So certainly some direction from council could be made to the building official. And building official is here if you want to have any
Okay, because I'm obviously not an expert, but just looking at it with my eyeball, if I was going to buy that property and down below, I'd be wondering, well, how about diverting some of this
I believe
runoff
our
here?
city attorney's eyebrows just went up.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, it might be a good time for me to point out, as Mr. Hotchkiss said, you're obviously not an expert, and and I'm not an expert, but I did advise the Planning Commission for like 11 years, and I saw this happening a lot, we can't engineer this. We
Right.
don't want to engineer this.
Right.
We don't know how to engineer this. So that's really not what this appeal is about. That's why people have civil engineers. And if we try to engineer this, even at the staff level, we're going to get the city in the middle of what is essentially a private civil concern over drainage. And drainage is this seamless web, and the answer as a city is almost invariably the civil engineers engineer it, and if for some reason it doesn't work, the parties may end up in Superior Court over it, but it doesn't really involve the city.
Okay, duly chastised. Thank you very much.
Likewise. Any other questions? Mr. Sweeney, did you want to mention something? Go right ahead. Come up to the podium.
Madam Mayor, Council, Fred Sweeney, member of the Single Family Design Review Board. I want to piggyback a little bit on the city attorney's overall view of this thing, because the appeal is being made based on a decision our board made. But as you recall, our board's purview is fairly restrictive. We're looking at aesthetics. We're looking at compatibility to the neighborhood context. We're looking at the issues that involve existing terrain, et cetera. So when we reviewed this project, the proposal by the applicant was to repair an existing condition, not alter the shape of the road, not alter the elevation of the road, not alter the general slope of the area below the road or above the road, but basically to correct what turns out to be, as you saw in your walkthrough, a relatively small erosion area, at least visually, and a few other minor issues that have occurred over the years. So our review is based on the documents presented, not the history of the conflict that apparently may have occurred between the appellant and the upper neighbor and the property owner. That wasn't presented to us. So it seems to me that, at least for the purposes of this discussion, is that the issue of an appeal or a non-appeal of our decision is based on the purview in which our board at least has, as we understand it, has been given the overall context of how this thing sits within the neighborhood. And certainly I agree with Councilman Hotchkiss. We're not qualified civil engineers on the committee, and we're certainly not looking at trying to engineer the entire canyon. Certainly we haven't heard from the property owner below the Foley's property, the Nahara family that owns the other property below that, where they actually have a structure that's more or less in the area of any runoff that would come off of that mountaintop, regardless of whether this road was there or not. So that becomes a much larger issue, because then you're talking about how the water flows all the way down to the ultimate stream that finds its way to the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, why don't we have the appellants come on up? Appellants, you have 30 minutes. Up to 30 minutes, and there's a timer right there at the podium. Just introduce yourself by name and then say what you need to say.
Okay, thank you for hearing this. So I'm Debbie Foley, and this is my husband, Tim Foley, and we're the property right below. And I gave a handout earlier just as a summary from our point of view. A little bit of our background. Obviously, we're not experts either, but we have, my family owned Vista Del Mundo for about 20 years, which is about a 2,000-acre ranch between San Marcos Pass and La Vista Road above Foothill. And so we have lived on working ranches, and we are quite familiar with roads and slides and what it takes to put in proper roads. And my husband actually was the foreman of that ranch and worked with several construction companies putting in many, many, many roads for years on that ranch. So we're not the normal residential family that just buys a house and says, oh my gosh, our hill is sliding and what is there to do? On the other side, we also don't have the financial capability to just keep hiring engineers and geotechs to keep this process going. And this process has been going for us now since 2000, when Michael Klein purchased the San Roque Ranch. When we purchased our property in the 90s, we knew there was an easement that went back to the ranch, and we knew that someday that easement could be developed and that there would be a road through the property. At that time, it was really a grassy knoll. There was no visible road or pathway. If there had been some traversing of that area, it had clearly grown over. The owners of the ranch before Mr. Bliss, I don't think I ever saw him, and before that I wasn't there, but I've heard from the Ayelos that they purchased their property from Alex Michaels, who owned the ranch as well, and he did quite a bit of work in and around that hillside. In the 70s, the property where our house actually sits, our entire hill slid from underneath the house, exposing all of the caissons. And that project is what led to those swells and the catch basin below being installed. And since that time, we've absolutely had no slippage or sliding on that portion of the hill. My understanding, and there are letters in the city files to reflect that some of the soil that was removed at that time was actually used as fill on the hillside where this easement is. And I want to point out that this is not an exclusive easement. This is a non-exclusive easement, meaning they have ingress and egress, but so do we, and so do the Ayelos. This is a shared piece of property, and no one's rights should overshadow someone else's rights. This is not their only access to their property. It doesn't landlock them. They put the road in primarily because they wanted horse facilities that sit right above that U. Up in that area, you can kind of see them. And they've, since the past year or so, have been applying for permits to do work up in that area. And it's our belief that they're trying to expand that to either contain more horses or do something else with it. I don't really know. I don't really care. Our concern is of two things or three things. One is the safety. It's always been really a primary issue to us. We did bring a case against the ranch in 2007, 2008, and one of the factors that we agreed to release the case, the legal case, was because Mr. Klein, Michael Klein's father, agreed to issue an insurance policy to hold us harmless if anyone was to be injured on that roadway. People cross that roadway almost daily. Just yesterday, someone stopped us and asked if they could cross over to hike to hook up with the trails. It does hook up with all of the trails. People ride their bikes, they lift them up over the gates, they hike, and people drive out there and park just to look at the vistas, especially in the evenings. And they get to the gate and then they have to back up. With that road, it's really dangerous. So I agree that the road needs to be fixed. It's there. I welcome it. We have no problem with having the driveway and the roadway there. But we want to use our property too. And we want it to be safe. And one of the things is that the easement only goes down about halfway. I don't even know if it's halfway. Maybe it's a quarter of the way down the hill. So their proposal is only to fix it up to their easement. Well, it's like an imaginary line. There's still damage below the easement that's occurred because of all of the grading that they've done over the past 10 years. And they've graded on their property that sits above ours on the ranch. And that water does come around that corner rather fast. And it's just pouring down on that road and now onto our property. And those swales that we have every winter, after it rains, we have to go down and clean out all of the mud and the silt that lands in those in order to protect our property below. I don't know why the Naharas aren't here. I haven't talked to them. They built the barn about 2 years ago, so we haven't really had a major downfall since they put the barn there. I don't even know if they know about the hearing today, to be honest with you. So that would be something that would have to be addressed. But what I'm really asking is that the applicants take time to come in and talk to us and ask us what is it that we want for the future of that road. They've never sat us down prior to submitting plans or coming to the city or showing up with bulldozers. They've never called us and asked us to sit down, go out for lunch or something and say, what is it that you guys want to do here? Do you want to plant? Do you have development plans? Here's what we want to do. What can we do to share this road and share this property? And I really think that that's an important aspect when it's not an exclusive easement. This is not just their use. It's our use too, and they've taken that away. We can't even walk on that hill anymore. For those of you that came out, I mean, trying to walk up and down that hill is nearly impossible. And it didn't used to be. It wasn't that way when we first purchased this property. So I'll let my husband talk, and then we would like to save our time that's remaining for the end. Thank you.
Hi, Council, Madam Mayor. My biggest concern is the amount of water and what the water is going to do. And I might ask Mr. Lamone if he'll put that the slide of their projected print up, that what their projected work is going to be done on it. That one. They're going to put all the water into a catch basin on the easement and put it through an 8-inch pipe and take it down, and it's going to be right at the edge of right there. That area is within their slope easement, but that area is also our property also. So just to take that concentrated water and put it there, yeah, it's going to be in a box and in boulders, but it's going to come through like all torrents through there, and that is on a hill. It's not in a flat area or anything like that. But my biggest concern is the amount of water that would accumulate on that easement is hardly anything. All the water is coming down from the parcel up above the horse stables coming down the road there. That's where the water's coming. I have photographs with food, actually went out there with food coloring at the gate and put food coloring when it was in the middle of the rain, and you can see the color of the water coming down from there. There's very little water just accumulates on that easement. You know, if it was just the amount of water on that easement that would get into that 8-inch pipe, I'd have not a real big concern. But it's the water that's coming down, and it moves really fast coming down that road. And they altered that road. They put that road in there. We have photographs of them having it paved, and it just, that's one of my biggest concerns is the amount of water that's coming down there. It's not from the easement area. It's coming down from a adjoining parcel. And the city's concern has always been, well, we don't want to say anything. We don't want to be involved. We don't want to be involved with a lawsuit. Well, sooner or later, somebody's going to have to protect us. You know, we sit back and the damage is being done and being done and being done. Every year, these holes and slides get bigger and bigger and bigger. When they went and did the work previously in 2007, 2008, 2009, it was always done without permits. We'd call the city building department would come up. The building inspectors would come out and say, well, they don't have permits. A lot of times if they did, the work was stopped. But everybody in the city would just throw their hands up. We can't be involved in this. We can't make judgment calls. Well, sooner or later, somebody has to protect, have to step in. This is the city land. This is privately owned land, but this is within the city boundaries. So that's my biggest concern is the amount of water that's going to be coming down that 8-inch pipe. It's not within the easement area. And then also, again, like my wife said, it's our access to the land. I can't, I'm getting older, and my access getting up to that road from the corner of my property, getting up to where I went up to meet the city council members yesterday, is getting harder and harder. They brought probably 4 to 5 feet of gravel fill, to get that slope just before it met Santa Teresita. This easement used to be a city easement. The city relinquished this easement in 1991. There's letters, it's in the file, they gave it up. For what reason, I really don't know why they gave it up, but it was. And it was projected for it to drain all the way out on Santa Teresita. When I mentioned that to Mr. Lamone says, well, they frown upon that now. Well, it is filled dirt that had to be bring in and brought back up again, but it would cost. But that could be the cost of enhancing your easement. And then again, the maintenance on the easement. There is never any maintenance on that easement road. There's no weed whacking. I'm the one who gets out and weed whacks my hill, and Mr. Ayala weed whacks his hill. If they have an easement, they should be maintaining that easement, and they don't. So that's all I want, and we'll just reserve the rest of the time for after. Thank you.
Okay, you have 18 minutes and 17 seconds left. So we'll then move on to the applicant, Mr. Lloyd.
Madam Mayor, honorable council members, my name is Mark Lloyd and I represent the applicant. I have a slide that I'd like to put up, if I can. Is the projector working? Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's been talk about purviews and jurisdictional issues. My purview in this process is to make sure that the improvements that need to get done correctly and appropriately and protect everybody's rights and interest. And so we hired Atiba Consultants to make that happen. As to the testimony that you've heard this afternoon, there's one thing that's clear, and there's long-term problems out here with the driveway and how it operates with drainage and the resulting erosion that has happened not only in this area but even to people's houses and whatnot. So we use the greatest degree of care and professional analysis of this project in order to put forth this permit, even though it is maybe seen by some to be a simple driveway. And in that process, we understood and knew that there was in fact unconsolidated fills that were underlying this driveway that required a solution that is to remove and recompact the soils that underlie the driveway and put those back in a compacted state so there would be a stable, safe slope for everyone's use and the adjoining property owner's downhill position and existence. I would say that the design flaw or the condition flaw that exists on this particular driveway was its design, of which it had the driveway crossfall back to the slope, and in essence wouldn't prevent water to sheet flow over and down the face of the slope. You don't want to actually do that either. But the problem with the crossfall going back to the slope is as drainage collects on the road, it pools, finds a place to breach over the edge, breaches there, and forms an erosion gully. If you tip the road so that it goes towards the slope, they end up doing pretty much the same thing. They'll find a rivulet and you'll get erosion. The proper design technique when you have this condition is to collect the water in a storm drain and pipe it to a safe location. And that is what we're proposing here. That's been the fatal flaw out here. That's been the design defect. And our plan is to correct that and go back and remediate the poor soils conditions that exist. I've presented here in this slide a little bit more of a regional view of conditions as far as drainage and whatnot. And as a slide, it's perhaps not showing up that well, but you can see here is the Aiello property, and then here is the Foley property. And we can probably go to your photograph after a bit, but what I wanted to do was define for you the hydrological drainage area, which is basically this area here. This is the Aiello property next door, their house, which you can see up from the slope of the road, and the landform crest just beyond his property. So this is the top of the drainage. Here's the horse rink that has been referred to, and the drainage comes along and captures this ridge coming down, captures all this ridge area here, comes down to this flat area. Here's Dr. Nahari's barn. And then it also comes along the back of the curb of the road. There's a distinguishment to be made there in that the road itself does not drain to this drainage area. The curb prevents it from doing that. And so you have the curb coming down here, and it's at the very back. There is a bowl kind of contouring that happens in here. And so as all this drainage comes down from all these areas here, it hits the bottom here, it concentrates, and it concentrates in this bowl area and finds its way down here. Eventually goes into Ontario Road. I believe there's a drainage inlet here that takes it down to the creek. So this is the drainage basin that is applicable here. And I respect the city attorney's advice, but still wanting to be all informative. The issue, one of the fundamental issues with drainage is you don't really want to put historic drainage into another basin, because then you start assuming the responsibilities for that and the changed conditions that result from there. So by taking this drainage here and putting it into the street, you would be putting it into another drainage area, another watershed, and if there were inherent problems that should arise from that, you would be the responsible party for it. So you always want to deal with drainage within its historic basin wherever you can. So, Jaime, can you bring back your picture slide in this area? Well, we can talk about the design. Here is the property line between the properties of the Foleys and the Iolas. Don't want to get into a bunch of easement discussions. That could be a seminar. But we have a non-exclusive easement. The Foleys don't have a non-exclusive easement. They own the property that has this part of the road. I know of no rights that they have to use this part of the road. We've never disputed if they go up there and use it. But to assert that we have the use of this road and you're keeping it from us, they have no easement rights over this part of the road. Their fee ownership ends at this part, subject to an easement here. True, they can use that to whatever extent they want to without upsetting our dominant rights. But to assert that we have rights here that we're taking away from them or otherwise abridging is not correct. This is Mr. Aiola's property, and he has the same rights of use of that property as long as he doesn't interfere with our uses as a road. So the proposal here is to key in for the exhibit that was shown you and to reconstruct this. I do want to point out that due to the poor compaction conditions that we found in the soils and that the washout of soils that have occurred with the storms over the last few years, we have to import 2,500 yards as the calculation to bring the compaction, shrinkage factors together and the additional soils for the voids that have been washed out. We have the materials on the ranch property, so they will not be trucked through the city on city streets and all of the residual effects that that has. We have the soil on the property. We'll simply bring it down and we'll deposit it in here and work it in lifts as to the recommendations of the soils report. The low point is in this area here. There's been discussions about raising the road and how to get the drainage out, and again, it would become a much larger, complex, and more expensive problem. And if the intent of that is just to redirect water out in the street, again, there's concerns about putting it in another basin. So the proper technique here to solve this problem is to get an inlet at the low point, pipe it over to here, and you still see, the contours in here, and this is true. There is additional slope coming down here. We've done borings out here where we have found the competent materials of which we, within our easement rights, can properly engineer, key, and bench and recompact the materials and stabilize this slope. And we discharge this drainage with a dissipator here, which takes the concentrated pipe flow, disperses it back into a quasi-sheet flow. But all of this drainage that comes down from this area all ends up concentrating in this swale area anyway. That is the natural drainage direction. When you looked at the Foley swales, and Jaime, can you bring back that photograph you had? When you look at the Foley swales as they come around, you can see that they're directing the water back to a discharge point here, which puts it in that same swale. That's the historic drainage direction. As to what effects it has on Dr. Nahara, just need to design with him, and he set up his barn and is doing what he's doing. But all this sheet flow that comes down their slope properly captured and channeled through this swale, ends up to the same place that it went eventually anyway and concentrated in here. Now, as far as upslope, if there would have been some walking a little farther along, you would have found that there were some catch basins for the conditions of the next drainage basin over that captures water there and then takes it down further into that drainage basin. Now, as I showed you on my drawing, this photograph is better. That drainage area comes up about like that, that's pertinent to ours. And so we're collecting this drainage that's coming down there, historic collections, and it's coming into the system. And so we are dealing with the historic drainage area and the drainage that's come there. Certainly we all remember last March and the 12 to 17 inches of rain that was reported in this area in 8 hours. And that is a catastrophic event, and that's what you're seeing this most recent damaging occurring. There are conditions there that would be termed acts of God in my book, and I'm sure there was rushing, flowing water in that regard. As part of the design board review, they had a couple conditions for us. They wanted to see a hydroseed mix, a specific mix. We had proposed on the plans hydroseeding, and so in our revised submittal back, we'll have a specific mix. There's also an oak tree right in this area right here. Actually, I think it's this one here. And so this reconstruction of this fill slope is daylighting over under this tree, and this is a down slope here. The design board wanted us to have an arborist report on that. I think the grading we're doing is actually putting soil on the downhill roots of the oak tree, and it's actually going to be a better condition because those roots are getting exposed, but we'll provide the arborist report too. So in essence, we provided all the necessary plans and engineering except the conditions of approval of the design review board, and would encourage you to follow the staff recommendation in regards to this particular appeal. Just one other comment, and that is the assertion by our neighbors that we have not wanted to talk or discuss this matter with them. Since the appeal has happened, by just latest example, I have sent 2 certified letters to the appellants asking them to mediate in a voluntary mediation process. I got no response. There is a long history of no response from these appellants. The ranch, its successors, and the current ownership of the ranch, as you know, Mr. Klein died a number of years back, several years back, has endeavored to work with the Foleys to remediate and address issues that they have to the extent they will let us. They have not let us. It may be a beneficial improvement to carry our grading down farther to the Toa slope and compact some soils down there, although we are benching into competent materials and meeting all of the prerequisite engineering standards for our plans. We'd be happy to address that. The Foleys will not communicate with us, will not do anything to discuss those issues or give us the opportunity to solve those problems. So it's perplexing to have that kind of attitude be put out to you that we are not the parties that want to communicate or resolve this issue. Safety concerns was also stated as one of the biggest issues that they have. The issues that are out there now are creating and exacerbating unsafe conditions. We are now at a point where we are almost to the November season. We have another season, which is La Nina. We'll probably get lots of rain, and this situation is going to get worse by the obstruction of these appellants. We could have got out there and fixed this problem already by now. It's about 2 weeks' worth of work. Being October 18th and having to go back through a plan check and whatnot, it's just not going to happen. In fact, I'm tempted to ask this council to modify the conditions that with proper erosion control, that we do this grading in the wet season under whatever control and direction that your staff would like to see done, just so we can alleviate these safety concerns that the appellants cling to so ferociously. We're willing to do that, but we just have not gotten any communication. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. You have 16 minutes and 55 seconds left. Mr. White, the question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Your last request was that the conditions be changed to allow grading to occur in the rainy season? Was that what I understood correctly?
We would like to see this remediation fixed as soon as possible because it's just going to make the situation worse. We think that the work effort here is of such a short term that we could find an appropriate weather duration of which this could happen.
So a 2-week window when it isn't raining and that this could occur.
And we would employ the proper, protection techniques against silting and other issues as necessary. If not, we're going to go through a whole winter here again, and who knows what may occur here.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When you go to perform the proposed work, if you're successful, will you have to be or put equipment on the Foley's property in order to perform this task at any given time?
Madam Mayor, Councilperson Rouse, no, we won't. Jaime, if you could please bring up the grading plan. You can see the extent of the easement line, right, going up through here. The key in the bottom of the fill is right in here. We've left, and that's the first contour, we've left room enough here that we can key and bench this part here and give ourselves enough working room over here to make that excavation to stay entirely within our easement and not go into areas that we don't have the right to go into. These join contours as they come up, those will be worked right along the line, compacted in 6-inch lifts, and then make the slope there. So we will not have to go on their property. My client is willing, with the agreements of the Foley, to do whatever that is reasonable to facilitate desires and wishes on their property. They'd have to grant us those rights too. We're not talking a permanent, easement. It could be a license, an extinguishable license, or anything else. So if the desire here is to work some issues they have on their property, we're willing to address that. They need to cooperate in that regard and give us the right to go on the property. Limited, temporary, short-term, whatever that may be.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Just a quick question. Is there a legal obligation for you to maintain this easement, or is it a shared obligation between the parties?
Well, not wanting to practice the law. Mr. Wiley gets angry when I try to do that.
Well, maybe I should direct that to Mr. Wiley.
Yeah.
Mr. Wiley?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, the answer is yes, generally. In my experience, easements are often drafted poorly and maybe have a legal description and say it's for roadway purposes, but it's not uncommon for whoever to forget to deal with the maintenance issues.
Right.
But the Civil Code, California Civil Code, does require that someone who is the beneficiary of an easement to maintain the easement.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
And that was going to be my answer, is the Civil Code provision.
Sure.
I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd.
In fact, even to go beyond that, if you do not show diligence there, there is then the basis to make a claim to extinguish the easement.
Thank you.
So if you're not maintaining your road, someone could come along with the underlying fee and have the court extinguish it.
Are you in agreement with that, Mr. Wiley? Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any speaker slips for this, no? Okay, so there is no public comment. I'll close the public comment portion. If the Foley's, you still have 18 minutes and 17 seconds if you'd like to add anything at this point.
A couple real quick things. Mr. Lloyd was talking about the water. If it came out to Santa Teresita, we take it out of it, put it into a different watershed. If the water was taken and put out onto Santa Teresita Road, it would go down to the end to the culvert. There is a drainage there, and that goes down into Dr. Nahar's property, which keeps all the water within the same watershed. The water wouldn't be taken into any different watershed. Being uncooperative, the way that I found out about this project, I drove up past the easement and I saw a development sign on my property. I got out and looked and it says 1383 development and 1383 Santa Teresita Drive development. I had no idea, So I called the phone number on there, and I believe the phone number, could be wrong, but I believe the phone number is Mr. Lloyd's office. And I got an employee at that office, and I asked him what the development was, and he said it's a roadway improvement. And I said, well, and he told me the only notice that I would receive was the sign that was placed there on the curb. That was sufficient notice, he told me, for me that I would get. And if I wanted to see anything about the development, I could go down to the city building department and I could view the plans. So that's the cooperation that we get. We didn't get called before these plans were drawn up to sit down to see how we wanted these plans and work together on this. We got a sign put out there. And I can't tell you how many times we've woken up in the morning where there's been bulldozers out there on the easement working. Not a phone call, not anything about, hey, we're going to do work on the easement today. Just that. I'm not sure the very date when they first started doing some work on the easement, and Greg Martin can attest to this. I got a call, and Michael Klein wanted to put in a dry well for the lot up above, but he had no water source. So they came to me and asked me if they could use my city water at my house, run garden hoses all the way up to that far property, and run the water for I think it's three solid days. Fine. Gave him the water, he paid the bill, worked together. And that's the way this started out. I'm not uncooperative. Believe me, we're not uncooperative. But when you wake up every morning to bulldozers out on your property with no warning, and you go out there and you say what's going on, and they tell you it's none of your business, that's uncooperative. And to call a phone number on the development sign to find out my address is on the development sign and what kind of development am I doing, and telling me that sign is sufficient notice, and every permit that has been pulled for any kind of work done on that easement, the permit's not 1383 Santa Teresita Road, it's not 1359 Santa Teresita Road, it's 1575 North Ontario Road. That's what all the permits that have ever been any work done on that easement have been pulled on. That's not the address of that easement.
Anyways, it's nice to meet you, Mr. Lloyd.
And you.
Mr. Lloyd is actually new to this project, so he doesn't actually know all the details of the history, and I'm not going to go into those today. I do want to say, though, I didn't say I had easement rights. I said I had rights onto the property, and part of the property is owned by the Ayelos, and our property lines split the easement road kind of diagonally into. So we have the property in the front from the street about maybe a third of the way back, and then the Ayelos have it the rest of the way back. But what I do want to emphasize, as far as I'm concerned, is the water issue is an issue that maybe needs to be dealt with engineers and with people that have a better knowledge than I do. What I want to know and what I want to say is that this project has literally taken away my rights of the land below and including the easement that is on my property. I can't plant it. I can't walk it. I can't do anything with it at this point. This plan doesn't address fixing any of that. It also is aesthetically not very pleasing. I mean, I bought a piece of property that it was a beautiful rolling hillside, and I ended up with a big, long, I don't know how many hundred, is it 100 feet? I don't know what that, 300 feet that road is. So it would be nice to see on this plan some trees, some actual vegetation other than just to keep the soil there. Something. Actually, in the 90s, when Alex Michaels had the property and he had a grading permit issued by the city, he removed several trees. The neighbors told me he removed over, I think, about a dozen trees. And then he didn't fulfill the rest of his project, so his permit expired. But those trees were never replaced like they were supposed to have been done in that plan. So, I mean, there's a lot of things on this plan, I think, that if you look at it, can be done better, can take our point of view from the way we're looking at it from our house and the way we're being affected by it into consideration. And I don't believe that San Roque Ranch, the Kleins, Pacificor, Mr. Lloyd, I mean, there's a whole list. I'm sometimes not sure who I'm supposed to talk with. So I don't think they have taken us into consideration at all during the last 10 years. And that's all we're asking you to do now. Thank you.
So I have a question for the two of you. Thank you. You just heard from Mr. Lloyd a willingness to sit down with you at this point and try to work out something. How do you respond to that? I mean, regardless, I don't want to get into the past and what happened and noticing, and that's it, but just what was offered today.
Well, as it stands now, when we found out about the plan and we went down and filled out the appeal, we went to the city to get our files updated, and we didn't know there was a geotech report until about maybe 12 days ago. So we just got that report from, is it Betty Weiss? Ms. Weiss sent it over to us on an email. It wasn't in our files. And we sent that out to several other engineers who have all told me that it would take them at least 30 to 60 days to look at this project and come up with anything that they could recommend. So we're kind of stuck. You know, we came to this meeting knowing we should have had a geologist or someone with us, but nobody could get it together really in this short of notice.
Okay.
So yes, we would be willing to sit down with them, but we would like to have our own engineer or someone have the time to actually to go through it.
With the property owners,
Okay.
Yeah.
Not their,
Yeah, we would like the owners there.
With the property owners.
Understood.
Yeah.
Understood. Mr. House has a question for you, too.
Actually, I want to pick up on what the mayor's asking you, but I want Mr. Wiley to be available for the question here too. So, and maybe we'll need to ask you too, Mr. Wiley, if we had a situation where there was a willingness to, on the part of the applicant, to work cooperatively with their neighbor, and the neighbor was willing to do that, and we're in this kind of a situation, it might be an opportunity. What role can the city play in assisting that in happening? I mean, I know we have limited abilities to do certain kinds of things, human nature being what it is, but do we have an opportunity here to be of assistance in addressing this appeal and helping them or requiring or taking advantage of this opportunity to support them in working together on this?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, I think yes, but I have to say that I think yes, because the city generally tries to be helpful with disputes among neighbors. But I think just in a larger context, it's important. I would say that the city council and the city staff, we try to keep our focus on the city issues. And I think the chair of the SFDB put it well, that the only thing going on here is SFDB review, and that review is about appearances. And so the city issue is the appearance of this. I mean, I perceive a real desire to, by the appellants to ask us to get into their easement dispute. And I'm hearing a private civil dispute over the way this easement works. And then, for example, landscaping is an appearance thing, but at the same time, the Foleys own this property. They can landscape it if they want, even though it's burdened by an easement. This is a dispute over a road easement where someone's building a road, and the city issue is the appearance of that. And it's really, the city issue isn't even really the drainage. That as we say, even with a standard building permit where there might be drainage issues involved, we require a civil engineer to engineer it and to sign off on it. And that solution may or may not be the right solution, but it is the property owner's engineer's solution. And if it doesn't work for a neighbor, it becomes an issue, a private civil issue. In a way, you're being asked to function much like a superior court and resolve this easement dispute. And that, I worry about that because we get a lot of appeals, and to get us in the middle of something like this could snowball.
Yes.
We start seeing appeals used as leverage to get mediation. So that's a long answer, and I apologize for that. This hasn't happened that much in my experience here. I've seen it one of a few times where an appeal was really used as leverage, and we kind of got caught up in trying to mediate it. But maybe it's appropriate here.
Well, Mr. Wiley, if I may, and my goal in even asking the question was if there were a willing applicant and the appellant, perhaps whatever they said here could be included in the approval. We do that with conditions of approval from time to time. I remember on the Planning Commission we were able to do that, where somebody said, oh, we'd be willing, just on their own, they volunteered to do something, maybe work together with a neighbor, that could become one of the conditions if they were willing to do that. So that was my question. Is that possible for us to do that if we wanted to?
Councilmember House, yes. And it reminds you something. The one time I saw something like this a few years ago, the council, I think, in retrospect, made a mistake in not imposing a time limit on the mediation, where it put the applicant in a really awkward position where they couldn't work it out, and 6 months later they're back and they're saying we couldn't work. So if we were to mediate something like this, I really would suggest that we say it be done within 30 or 60 days. Otherwise, this would be rescheduled for a council decision, assuming that the mediation decision to refer to mediation would result in the council kind of not making a decision today.
Thank you very much. Madam Mayor, I don't have anything more to say, but perhaps the appellant wanted to just...
Well, yeah, let me get, I want to make sure, before we get into deliberations, you had your second round of statements, so
I
thank you.
just wanted to respond to something that
Well,
Mr. Riley
it'll be
said.
up to us if we want it, so it's okay. So if you could, if you want to give me 30 seconds of what you want to say, that's
I
fine.
just wanted to say I have some trees on that easement now that are, my understanding, are going to be removed in this plan.
Okay.
And I don't know that they're going to be replaced, and that I don't know that I can just plant that hillside in the condition that it is.
Okay, thank you. The applicant still has 16 minutes and 55
Have any
seconds.
time left at all?
No, you've
we're out?
used up your time. You said thank you very much. So we had, okay, so now we're up to
Mayor,
the
honorable
applicant.
council members, as Ms. Foley identified, I'm new in this, and you that know me know that I'm a cup half full kind of person. I'm looking for resolutions. I will again make the offer to the Foleys, as I did in the design review board testimony, and here today to meet with them, to deal with any reasonable requests that they may have, including the bearing of all expenses, dealing with a proper remediation if it needs to extend onto their property. We're open to that discussion. I voluntarily do that. I believe Mr. Wiley's right. We don't want to be punished by a condition necessarily, but we have every intent and purpose to work with these neighbors. They are our neighbors, and made that offer repeatedly. I'm not going to debate the other points made by the Foleys. That is a constant offer that I have made verbally at hearings, in letters to the Foleys, and continue to want to honor that.
Mr. Lloyd, what would be a reasonable time period if we were to go that way? And Mr. Wiley suggesting putting a time limit.
As far as that, if we can get together within a 30-day period and deal with these issues, come up with something that works for both of them if we can, but we don't want to be punished and held hostage by a process that we would consider to be abusive of that. So not only is there, if we are open to accept, to mediate with them, but I'm giving you my word that we will talk to them and deal with them fairly appropriately. Also, if you're going to go that route, again, I'd like the council to consider letting us get this work done during the rainy season if appropriate weather patterns and conditions exist, of which we could agree with the city building staff were appropriate.
Okay, thank you very
Madam
much.
Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, that closes everything except for us. Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to ask staff about the issue of grading in the rainy times.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, I just checked with the building official, and we are allowed to do grading during that time period, but there has to be a full erosion control plan approved by the building official before that happens.
Mr. Hotchkiss.
Mr. Wiley, maybe I'm asking you to do our work, but how do we craft a plan that you've heard in the last 10 minutes seemed to be sort of a meeting of the minds, or at least close to it? Can you help me with that? How would we craft that motion?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, if there were a council desire to see this mediated, see the applicant and the appellant, get together as they've offered to do and mediate, the first thing would be to suggest that we continue, that no decision be made on this, and that we continue it, say, for 45 days, and that within 30 days, the two parties get together and attempt to mediate a resolution, in which case the appellants can simply withdraw their appeal, and that would be the end of it. I did hear the appellants say that they would like to insist that the actual property owner be in the mediation, and I don't know what the applicant's position is on that, but I could see that being difficult at times. Property owners don't necessarily live here, and sometimes property is owned by corporations.
And they're not here, and they're not present now, so we don't know what.
And I would suggest that at least that the mediation, there be a representative of the Klein property that with the authority, clear authority to make decisions at that mediation. And I suppose we could apparently make it clear that the work could be done during the rainy season so long as there is an erosion control plan acceptable to the building official.
Okay, thank you. Well, I guess we just had a motion. I mean, we make a motion from what his statement is, and I would do that if I would have a second here.
We have, why don't we have, there's
Discussion first.
discussion a little bit,
Sure.
and then that might be a direction where we're headed. I saw Mr. Rouse and then Ms. Self.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a question for Mr. Lamone. What is, let's just say we progress towards this project, what's left in terms of the city's process, what in terms of the permitting process, what, starting from here on to the completion project, what's left with you?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, the next submittal would be for a final approval on consent calendar, where the applicant would respond to the outstanding remaining questions that the board asked, and then they would subsequently apply for a building permit. And fairly quick process, I think, because of the urgency of the repair, if we were to agree that it were to happen fairly quickly within the rainy season.
Well, when you say building permit, you're including engineering, all the structural, the
Well, there's a
roads?
plan check process that they would examine the proposal for plan check. So there's a period there. Then they would respond to those corrections if there were corrections, and then a subsequent permit issuance.
I was just thinking the practical issues we talked about, perhaps trying to do things in the wet season and.
Yes,
the
I'm hearing
timeline
some
with
support for that. So there is currently a condition on the plans that says no grading to occur between November and April 15th. So we would essentially remove that condition and allow that grading if you so choose.
And as a quick side, just an administrative thing, when the notices went up with the Santa Teresita, is that the street, addresses?
Yes.
Those obviously, because there's an easement, but those people still own the properties.
Right.
Would they not get notices besides just the posting?
Certain projects, Councilman Rouse, do require noticing, and some do not fall under the requirement for noticing. So this probably did not get a notice, mailed notice, but a posting notice might have been required at this case.
Just to follow up on that, anything to the property itself on top of the on-tear that's through the county, do we know what their noticing requirements are for, those kind of building, that if it was the city, that would require a mailed notice?
Yes, they do have mailed noticing requirements for their development process also, and they've also expanded to require posted postings.
And does the county have, like we do with interested parties, if there's an address that they would like to receive?
I believe so. Now, again, the city learned from previous permitting applications not to notice this under the North Arnterre Road project. So that's why we use the two property that underline this road.
But the Foleys could go to the county planning department, ask at least to make sure they can put themselves on an interested parties list for that address, so that anything that does go out, they'll get a copy.
That's
of it.
correct.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Self.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think as an incentive, normally when appeals are withdrawn, I would suggest that the applicant receive their money back as additional incentive to not bring it forward again and to...
You mean the appellant?
Yeah, the
You said
Foley's.
applicant. You said applicant.
Sorry.
You mean the appellant?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. With
Yeah,
that.
no,
Is that all
that's
you-
okay. I just think as an incentive, because obviously it's going to take a lot more time if it has to come back here and go through this, and that would be my suggestion.
Okay. Mr. House?
Well, I'm going to, actually, you were starting a motion, and I was going to second your motion. But I've got something put together here that might help us with that. Is that all right? Okay. First of all, I want to really appreciate everybody, Foley's and the clients and representatives and all, for your willingness to work with one another. This is very difficult. We recognize it. And perhaps this is an opportunity to start fresh. Wish the best for you all. So the motion would include these elements, continuing this for 45 days with a requirement that within 30 days, the representatives of they meet with the representatives of the Klein property, meet with the Foleys, and I think the representation has to be authorized to act on behalf of the owners, as was suggested by our attorney, and to work to fulfill on your offer to meet any reasonable request, including any remediation on their property, but you would get together and work on that. And then it would have this, it would remove that requirement for not working during the rainy season, and but it would have to have an erosion control plan acceptable to our building official. And I think, and then I suppose waive that fee for the applicant or for the appellant if it were to be, if the appeal were to be withdrawn.
I'd like to second, if I may. And Mr. Wiley, do you have a comment you wanted to make?
Yes, Madam Mayor, can I suggest that we make it clear, or even this would be a condition or part of the motion, that if the appeal is not withdrawn prior to the 45 days, or, I guess that this hearing would be back on calendar for the council deliberations only.
Okay, so we would continue this hearing up to this point in time. We wouldn't have a whole new appeal
Correct.
process, so just come back to council deliberation.
And to be real specific, we'd recommend you continue it to December the 6th.
Correct, yeah. That would be the actual date of the council meeting.
Okay, we'll add that to the motion.
Second also.
So we're amending the 45 days to December 6th council hearing, 49 days, so, but yeah, the Tuesday.
We'll say till December 6th.
December 6th, okay. Any, Mr. Rouse, do you have your?
Yeah, question for the maker of the motion. If for some reason the parties come to an agreement sooner than that, can this be moved up on our calendar?
Well, then the appeal would be dropped.
Yeah.
And
So-
then, right?
So we're just done.
It doesn't,
All right.
it wouldn't come back. Right, so we would just, if there's agreement beforehand, we would just hear that the appeal was dropped and everyone's happy, hopefully. Right, exactly. Okay, any other questions on the motion?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I just wanted to say, as the maker of the motion, I'd like to know, I'd like to give the Foleys a chance if they needed to speak to that.
Mr. and
They
Mrs.
don't
Foley,
have
do you
to.
want?
They don't have to. We can just move ahead. But I just wanted to make sure you had an opportunity. I saw you talking with one another. If there was something critical that I'm missing in this motion, I'd like to know about it right now.
You need to come up to the mic if you're going to say anything.
I just didn't know how it would work if they were going to start the process now of doing the work, and we were still going to sit down to negotiate something.
Let's get
how
clarification on that from our staff.
I don't believe any work will be done between now and December 6th unless the appeal is dropped, which is by you. Am I correct?
That's correct. I'm not hearing that they can continue in our city review process until this is resolved.
So if the appeal's dropped, then they can move forward. If the appeal happens, we'll have a meeting December 6th, council deliberation, and then depending on what happens up here, that will determine the next course of action for the applicant.
Got it. Thank
Okay?
you for the clarification.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on the motion? Mr. House?
Once again, I see Mr. Lloyd had something, and I really want to get this right. So, Mr. Lloyd, may we hear from him, please?
Mr. Lloyd?
Madam Mayor, honorable council members, I would like to ask that perhaps we consider that we can still be working in the process but not issued any permit, because I'd like to start the plan check process. If we come to some resolutions with the Foleys as to the concrete provisions of safety that they mentioned, I can quickly alter the plans to include those. But I'd like to get down the road on that process so that December 6th doesn't come and I'm out on March 6th trying to do some grading and the winter has happened. I'll jump through the hoop if the whole Foleys will work with us. But I'd like to not arrest the process, just defer the permit.
Okay.
And if I may, I'd like my project attorney to speak just for a moment.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to hear from the attorney.
Go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Mayor, council members. My name is Tim Traeger. I work with Riker Fowle. I've represented Dr. Klein and Michael Klein and Rancho San Roque for a long time. We really want to work with the Foleys to work this out, and we're happy to mediate with them, but we've mediated with them before and haven't resolved this issue. I don't want as Mr. Lloyd mentioned, to be penalized if we come back here and it hasn't been resolved because we can't get together. We're going to try, and we really hope to. But I'd like the decision to be based upon, the design review board, parameters, and not the fact that we can't come eye to eye with the Foleys on doing the work that we hope we can do for them. Thanks.
Okay. Understood. Staff, could you comment on that request?
Madam Mayor, there are two processes. One is the single-family design review final approval process. That can be placed into limbo, and we've allowed projects to be submitted into the Building and Safety Division to do some plan check review and comments, but they proceed at their own risk. And maybe Mr. Wiley wants to comment on whether that was,
Mr. Wiley?
as long as no permits issued.
Madam Mayor, that makes sense to me. The key thing is that it's clear that we won't issue a building permit unless this is resolved. So I see no problem with letting them getting into plan check.
But they still need final approval from SFDB, and that may or may not happen depending on this process and if it comes back to us on appeal.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. White, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam. Well, just I'm concerned that we're risking losing time on this. I think that everybody is aware of the dangers there. And so I would hate to see a rainy season get going and have this problem hung up because we're a process here. So I appreciate that we've got an opportunity to have a bona fide mediation going on, and I'm grateful to hear that. But I also want this to go as quickly as possible so that we're not ending up in a heavy, potentially heavy rain year, and this thing is not resolved. So I just want to do whatever we can to have this mediation occur quickly, and then this process move along quickly as well to get this road repaired. So that's my concern, and I don't want this motion to be slowing this down unnecessarily.
And I think I'm hearing also the intent of the council with this, that should the appeal be dropped, the sooner it gets back to SFDB for final approval, and I guess, it would be for final approval, the better for those reasons exactly. So,
Madam Mayor, I'm also hearing a request that it be allowed to be submitted into Building and Safety for a plan check.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Good luck with that. Hopefully we will not see you on December 6th. That would be nice. That's right. All right. Any council member committee assignment reports?
I have one.
Yes, Ms. Self.
At the MTD meeting today, they're moving ahead. They have 15 intersections on Upper State Street where the buses have the capability of expanding green lights for meeting their headways better. And I'm not sure how that's working with the cross traffic and stuff, but it's new, and so it's hoping that it will get you faster where you're going.
Great. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, the parking committee met and had a presentation on the De La Guerra project and expressed some creativity and flexibility in terms of the number of parking spaces, where they might be located, and the disposition of the various commercial spaces that had been lined out before. in terms of whether or not they were needed or the hours they might be utilized. So they're willing to work and be flexible with the designers.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, well, with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.